The wind, a relentless sculptor of the plains, whipped across the Vance ranch, carrying with it the scent of dust and dried sagebrush. It was a wind that seemed to mirror the character of Silas Vance himself, harsh, unyielding, and carrying a chill that no summer sun could fully dispel. His ranch, a sprawling testament to his ambition and iron will, was a kingdom carved from the untamed wilderness of Montana Territory. The sprawling manor, built with stone quarried from nearby hills, stood as a stark monument to his success, a beacon of prosperity in a land that offered little for the faint of heart. Silas Vance was a man forged in the crucible of the frontier. He'd arrived with nothing but a fierce determination and a keen eye for opportunity, and through sheer grit and a shrewd understanding of the land and its resources, he'd amassed a fortune. Cattle, his livelihood, roamed his vast territories in uncountable herds, their brand a symbol of his dominance. He was respected, feared, and grudgingly admired by those who dared to cross his path. Yet, beneath the veneer of rugged success, lay a heart as barren as the winter tundra. His daughter Eleanor was the sole heir to his empire, a striking young woman with a spirit that had at times threatened to bloom in defiance of her father's stoic demeanor. She possessed a beauty that was more delicate than the rugged landscape she inhabited. Her mother, a woman of quiet grace who had succumbed to consumption years ago, had been the only softness Silas had ever permitted in his life. Eleanor inherited her mother's gentle nature, a trait Silas seemed to resent, a constant, quiet reminder of a vulnerability he'd long since buried. Today, however, the gentle spirit of Eleanor was overshadowed by a pallor that had nothing to do with the usual sun-kissed glow of a rancher's daughter. A fever had taken hold of her, stealing the color from her cheeks and the spark from her eyes. It had started subtly, a persistent cough, a weariness that no amount of rest could dispel. Now it had escalated into a raging inferno within her young body. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her forehead burned with an unnatural heat, and her limbs trembled with an unsettling weakness. Silas Vance stood at the threshold of Eleanor's room, his tall, imposing frame casting a long shadow across the polished wooden floor. He did not enter. His hands, calloused from years of wielding a rope and a branding iron, were clenched at his sides. His gaze, usually sharp and penetrating, was clouded with a mixture of annoyance and a primal, unacknowledged fear. The illness that gripped his daughter was not merely a physical affliction. It was an inconvenience, a disruption to the meticulously ordered world he had built. Dr. Alistair Finch, a man whose practice spanned dusty frontier towns and isolated homesteads, wrung his hands at the foot of Eleanor's bed. His medical bag, a worn leather satchel, lay open, its contents, vials, bandages, and meager tools, exposed to the dim light filtering through the drawn curtains. He'd administered what little he could, a cooling compress, a bitter tonic that Eleanor had barely managed to swallow. The fever, however, remained stubbornly high, a relentless enemy that refused to yield. "Silas," Dr. Finch began, his voice low and strained. "She is gravely ill. This fever, it's unlike anything I've seen in these parts. We need to maintain constant care. Fluids, rest, and I'll prepare a stronger poultice." Silas's eyes, the color of gunmetal, flickered towards the doctor, then to his daughter, who lay listlessly on the feather mattress, her breathing ragged. A deep frown creased his brow. "What do you mean? Unlike anything you've seen?" His tone was clipped, accusatory. He didn't tolerate uncertainty, especially when it threatened to disrupt his control. "The frontier is a harsh mistress, Silas," Dr. Finch replied, trying to keep his voice even. "We are exposed to many things. It could be a bad strain of influenza, or something contracted from the elements." "Contracted?" Silas's voice rose, a sharp edge to it. "From what? From the dirt? From some godforsaken Indian plague brought by the wind?" The words were spat out, laced with the prejudice that had been a constant companion to his success. He viewed the native tribes not as people, but as obstacles, remnants of a past he was determined to erase. Eleanor stirred, a faint whimper escaping her lips. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, searching. "Pa!" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Silas flinched, not from concern, but from the raw vulnerability in her plea. It was a sound that chipped away at his carefully constructed facade of invincibility. He couldn't bear to see that weakness, that utter dependence. It reminded him too much of his late wife, of a time when his own heart had been less guarded, and therefore, he believed, less strong. She's weak, Silas stated, his voice hardening. Too weak. This lingering illness, it's a burden, a drain. On the household, on my resources. He looked at Dr. Finch, his eyes cold and devoid of empathy. If she cannot recover swiftly, then perhaps it is best she is not here, to prevent any further contagion, of course. Dr. Finch's jaw dropped. Silas, you can't be serious. She's your daughter. She needs you now more than ever. She is a Vance, Silas declared, his voice resonating with an authority that brooked no argument. And Vances are not frail. They are strong. If she cannot be strong, then she is a disgrace. I will not have her weakness infecting my home, my ranch, my legacy. He turned his back on his daughter's bedside, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the horizon. Prepare a wagon. She will be taken to the old trapper's cabin by the northern creek. She can recover there, or not. It is her choice. Dr. Finch watched horrified as Silas Vance, a man of immense wealth and power, turned his back on his own flesh and blood, condemning her to a solitary struggle against a life-threatening fever. The wind howled outside, a mournful lament for a father's lost humanity. The frost in Silas Vance's heart had finally claimed its most precious victim. The rough-hewn wood of the wagon dug into Eleanor's fevered skin. Each jolt and bump sent searing pain through her already ravaged body. The sun beat down with a cruel indifference, its rays amplified by the thick wool blanket that was meant to keep her warm, but only served to intensify the burning heat of her delirium. She was barely conscious, her world reduced to a series of fragmented sensations: the rumble of the wagon wheels, the rough texture of the blanket, the distant hazy calls of her father's men. John, one of Silas's most trusted hands, drove the wagon. His face was a mask of stoic resignation. He'd been ordered by Vance to take Eleanor to the abandoned trapper's cabin, nestled deep in the foothills, a good half-day's ride from the main ranch. The instructions were clear: leave her there with a few provisions and return. No fuss, no questions. John was a man of his word, bound by loyalty and the need to keep his job, but the act gnawed at him. He'd seen Eleanor grow up, a vibrant child who often brought a rare smile to his gruff face. This was no way to treat a daughter, feverish or not. Beside him, Mrs. Gable, the ranch's cook, and a woman known for her sharp tongue and surprisingly soft heart, tried to make Eleanor as comfortable as possible. She'd managed to sneak a small flask of cool water, a few strips of dried jerky, and a precious, albeit wilted, apple into the wagon, defying Silas's explicit orders. "Just you hold on, little one," she murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears, gently dabbing Eleanor's forehead with a damp cloth. "This ain't right. Not right at all." Eleanor mumbled incoherently, her eyes fluttering open for brief moments, revealing a wild, unfocused gaze. She saw distorted shapes, heard phantom whispers. The world outside the wagon was a blur of green pines and distant, jagged peaks, a landscape as harsh and unforgiving as the man who had cast her out. The fever had stripped away her illusions, leaving her vulnerable, exposed. They reached the cabin as dusk began to paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was a desolate place, a solitary structure with a sagging roof and a door that hung precariously on a single hinge. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Inside, a thin layer of dust coated every surface, and cobwebs draped from the rafters like macabre decorations. It was a far cry from the opulent rooms of the Vance Manor, a testament to neglect and abandonment. John and Mrs. Gable worked quickly, their movements tinged with a grim urgency. They spread a thin mattress on the floor, laid out the meager provisions, and built a small sputtering fire in the hearth. Mrs. Gable ensured Eleanor was propped up, her breathing still shallow and labored. "I've left enough water for a few days, and some dried meat," John said, his voice gruff, avoiding Mrs. Gable's searching gaze. "And a rifle for protection, though I doubt anything much ventures this far out." He hesitated, a flicker of defiance in his eyes. "If you need anything more, ma'am, once she's a bit better—" "I know, John," Mrs. Gable interrupted, her voice firm. "Thank you for what you've done. Now you best be getting back before Silas misses you." John nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly as he turned to leave. He glanced back one last time at the small, desolate cabin, at the woman he'd once known as a spirited young girl, now a fragile figure battling for her life. The image would haunt him. As John's wagon disappeared into the gathering gloom, a profound silence descended upon Eleanor. It was a silence broken only by the crackling fire and her own labored breaths. The isolation was absolute. The biting mountain air seeped through the cracks in the cabin walls, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat that still raged within her. She was alone, truly alone, for the first time in her life. Hours passed. The fire dwindled to embers, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock her solitude. Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness, her dreams a chaotic landscape of feverish visions and unspoken fears. She saw her father's stern face, his eyes like chips of ice. She heard his words, a disgrace. The abandonment was a physical ache, a gnawing emptiness that mirrored the hollowness in her stomach. Sometime in the deep of the night, a new sound pierced the silence. It was a soft rustling, an almost imperceptible movement outside the cabin. Eleanor's eyes snapped open, her heart pounding against her ribs. Fear, sharp and primal, seized her. Was it a wild animal, or something worse? She reached for the rifle John had left, her trembling fingers fumbling with the cold metal. The sound grew closer, accompanied by the crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. The cabin door creaked open, admitting a sliver of moonlight. Eleanor raised the rifle, her breath catching in her throat. In the dim light she saw a silhouette, a tall, lean figure, cloaked and hooded, moving with a quiet grace that was both unnerving and strangely compelling. The figure paused at the threshold, as if sensing her presence. Then a voice, low and resonant, spoke in a language Eleanor had never heard before, a language that seemed to flow like a river, ancient and melodic. It was a sound that was utterly foreign, yet carried a strange warmth. Eleanor, weak and terrified, could only stare, the rifle shaking in her hands. The solitary path she had been forced to tread had just taken an unexpected and potentially dangerous turn. The wilderness, in its vast indifference, had delivered her not to death but to the unknown. The figure stepped fully into the cabin, revealing itself to be a man, tall and lean, with the weathered features of someone who lived in harmony with the rugged landscape. His dark hair was pulled back, and his eyes, dark and intelligent, held a depth that Eleanor couldn't quite decipher. He wore clothing that was unfamiliar to her, a blend of practical leather and woven fabrics, adorned with subtle, intricate patterns. He was an Apache, a fact that sent a fresh wave of fear through Eleanor, a fear ingrained by years of Silas Vance's prejudiced pronouncements. He moved with an economy of motion, his gaze sweeping over the meager contents of the cabin, and finally settling on Eleanor, huddled by the dying embers of the fire, the rifle still clutched in her trembling hands. He didn't approach immediately. Instead, he stood by the doorway, observing her with an unreadable expression. "You are ill," he stated, his voice a low rumble. The English was accented, carrying a cadence that was both foreign and oddly soothing. It was a stark contrast to the harsh guttural tones she associated with the men who worked on her father's ranch. Eleanor, startled by his clear speech, could only nod, her throat too dry to form words. The rifle slipped slightly in her grasp, her grip weakening. The Apache man took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate, a clear indication that he meant no harm. "The fever is strong. It burns you." He reached into a pouch at his side and produced a small, intricately carved wooden object. He held it out to her. Eleanor hesitated, her mind racing. Silas's words echoed in her ears, "Indian plague." But there was something in the man's steady gaze, a quiet confidence that disarmed her fear, if only slightly. Desperation was a powerful motivator. With a deep breath, she extended a trembling hand and took the object. It was smooth and cool to the touch, carved in the likeness of a bird. As her fingers closed around it, a subtle warmth spread through her palm, a comforting sensation that seemed to seep into her weary bones. What is this?" she managed to croak, her voice raspy. "A gift," he replied simply, "from the earth. It will help calm the fire within." He watched her for a moment, his eyes assessing her condition. "You should not be alone, not like this." He turned and moved with swift, silent grace towards the small, rickety table. From another pouch, he withdrew a small stoppered vial filled with a dark, viscous liquid. He then rummaged through the provisions Mrs. Gable had left, finding a tin cup. He poured a small amount of the liquid into the cup, then approached Eleanor cautiously. "Drink," he urged gently. "It is a cleansing, for the sickness." Eleanor's eyes darted between the vial and the man's face, Doubt warred with a desperate yearning for relief. She remembered her mother, always so trusting, so prone to seeing the good in people. Perhaps that was a strength she had inherited, a strength that Silas had tried so hard to extinguish. She took the cup. The liquid smelled of herbs, pungent and earthy. She tipped it to her lips and swallowed. It was bitter, intensely so, but it left a cool sensation on her tongue, and a strange sense of clarity began to settle over her. The man watched her with an unblinking intensity. "My name is Chaitan," he said, offering the information as if it were a rare and precious gift. "Eleanor," she replied, the name feeling foreign on her tongue after so much silence. Chaitan nodded. He then turned and, with a few deft movements, began to reinforce the flimsy cabin door, using branches and stones he had gathered. He worked with a quiet efficiency, his actions speaking louder than words. He was not just a passerby. He was offering a form of protection, a silent promise of safety. As he worked, Eleanor's mind began to clear, the fog of fever starting to recede. She observed him, trying to reconcile his gentle demeanor with the fearsome reputation of his people. He moved with a profound respect for his surroundings, his presence somehow calming the wildness of the night. He was not the savage her father had described. He was different. When he had finished securing the door, he turned back to Eleanor. "The fever will break soon," he said with a quiet certainty. "But you will need care, more than this place can offer." He gestured vaguely towards the wilderness surrounding them. "My people are not far. We can offer you shelter and healing." Eleanor stared at him, a mixture of shock and disbelief washing over her. To accept help from an Apache, it was unthinkable. It was a betrayal of everything her father stood for, everything he had taught her to fear. Yet the alternative was to remain here, alone and vulnerable, her fate hanging precariously in the balance. The fire within her was still burning, but the chill of abandonment was beginning to give way to a different kind of chill, the cold realization that her father's world offered no solace, only rejection. I don't know," she whispered, her voice still weak. Chaitan met her gaze, his dark eyes holding a profound understanding. "Fear is a cage, Eleanor. Sometimes the path to freedom lies in stepping outside its bars." He offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Rest now. The night is long, and tomorrow brings new choices." He then moved to a corner of the cabin, gathering some dry leaves and brush, and with practiced ease coaxed a small, steady fire to life. He settled himself by the hearth, a silent sentinel, his presence a strange, unexpected comfort in the desolate wilderness. Eleanor, exhausted and still uncertain, found herself drifting into a restless sleep, the image of Chaitan's calm, steady face etched in her mind, a flicker of hope in the encroaching darkness. The morning sun, a reluctant visitor through the dusty panes of the cabin's single window, found Eleanor awake. The raging fever had indeed subsided, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a dull ache in her head. The air, though still cool, felt less suffocating, and the world outside seemed less menacing. She cautiously sat up, her muscles protesting with every movement. The rifle lay beside her, no longer a symbol of desperate defense, but a reminder of the fear that had gripped her. Chaitan was already awake, tending to a small crackling fire outside the cabin. The aroma of roasting meat, unfamiliar, yet not unpleasant, drifted towards her. He looked up as she emerged, his expression calm. "So you slept," he stated, a simple observation. "The fever has broken." Eleanor nodded, stepping out into the crisp morning air. The vastness of the landscape stretched out before her, a breathtaking panorama of rolling hills, distant mountains, and an endless sky. It was a beauty that felt untamed, raw, and profoundly indifferent to human suffering. She felt a pang of something akin to homesickness, quickly suppressed. This was her reality now. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling inadequate, "for staying, for the medicine." Chaitan gestured to the provisions Mrs. Gable had left. The woman also showed kindness. She left what she could. He offered her a portion of the roasted meat, which Eleanor accepted gratefully. It was lean and flavorful, unlike the heavy, often greasy food of her father's ranch. As they ate in a companionable silence, Eleanor's gaze drifted towards Chaitan. She couldn't shake the ingrained prejudice, the ingrained fear, yet his quiet dignity and the gentle way he tended to her needs were slowly chipping away at her preconceptions. "My father," she began hesitantly, he sent me here." Chaitan's expression remained unreadable, but a subtle shift in his posture suggested he had anticipated this. "Men of power often build walls," he said, his voice neutral. "Sometimes they lock themselves in, and sometimes they lock others out." Eleanor's breath hitched. It was a surprisingly astute observation, delivered without judgment. "He believed I was a burden, contagious." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Chaitan looked towards the distant mountains. "The elders speak of balance, of how all living things are connected. Sickness is a disruption of that balance, but it is not a sin, and it is not a reason to cast away life." He turned his dark eyes back to her. "Your father's heart is cold. It has forgotten the warmth of the sun." His words struck a chord deep within Eleanor. She thought of her mother's gentle touch, her quiet strength, qualities Silas had always seemed to dismiss. Had her father's fear of vulnerability made him cruel, or was he simply a cruel man? Where do you live?" she asked, the question born out of a dawning realization that she had no home to return to. "We are a traveling people," Chaitan replied. "Our home is the land. We follow the seasons, the herds, but our main encampment is in the valley beyond those peaks." He pointed with his chin. "It is a place of peace, of healing. If you wish to come, you would be safe there." The offer was both tempting and terrifying. A new world, a new culture, a stark departure from the life she had known. It meant shedding the skin of Eleanor Vance, the pampered daughter of a wealthy rancher, and facing an uncertain future, surrounded by people her father had taught her to revile. I cannot impose," she stammered. "My father he will surely search for me." Chaitan gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Silas Vance is a man who does not easily admit to mistakes. He has cast you out. He will not easily welcome you back. And even if he did, would you return to a place where your spirit is so starved?" He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "Your path now lies elsewhere. The choice, however, is always yours." He stood, gathering the remnants of their meager meal. "I must return to my people. My sister Nala will be concerned. I will come back tomorrow. If you wish to travel, I will be here." He looked at her one last time, his gaze steady. "Do not let fear guide your steps, Eleanor Vance. Let wisdom." With that, he turned and melted back into the trees as silently as he had appeared, leaving Eleanor alone once more in the vast expanse of the wilderness. The sun climbed higher, its warmth a welcome change, but the chill of her father's rejection still lingered. She looked towards the towering peaks, towards the hidden valley Chaitan had spoken of. A new journey was beginning, one that would force her to confront not only the harsh realities of the frontier, but the deepest truths within herself. The whispers of the past, the echoes of her father's cruelty, were slowly being replaced by the quiet call of a different future, a future found in the most unlikely of sanctuaries. Days bled into a week. Eleanor remained in the trapper's cabin, a solitary figure caught between two worlds. The initial fever had receded, but a profound weakness still clung to her. Her days were spent tending to the small fire, rationing the dwindling provisions, and watching the horizon with a mixture of apprehension and a nascent curiosity. She practiced with the rifle, the weight of it becoming more familiar, a small comfort in her isolation. The carved bird, clutched in her hand at night, seemed to radiate a quiet strength, a tangible link to the kindness she had encountered. Chaitan kept his word. Each day, as the sun began its descent, he would appear a silent guardian. He brought fresh water from a hidden spring, a rabbit he'd snared, or a handful of edible berries. He spoke little of himself or his people, but he listened, truly listened, when Eleanor, emboldened by his quiet presence, began to speak of her life at the ranch. She recounted hushed memories of her mother, of the few moments of warmth she'd experienced before her mother's passing, and of the increasing coldness of her father afterwards. "He loved my mother," Eleanor confessed one evening, her voice barely a whisper as they sat by the fire outside the cabin. "But he loved his legacy more. He saw me as an extension of that legacy. When I fell ill, he saw my weakness as a threat to it." Chaitan nodded, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. "A man can build a great house of stone, but if its foundation is built on fear, it will crumble with the first storm." His words resonated deeply. Eleanor had always felt like an exhibit in her father's grand estate, a prize to be displayed, not a person to be cherished. The illness had revealed the fragility of that facade, and Silas, rather than reinforce it, had chosen to dismantle it entirely. One afternoon, a sound broke the usual rhythm of the wilderness, the distant whinny of horses followed by the gruff shouts of men. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Silas. He had found her. A surge of panic, followed by a flicker of defiant anger, coursed through her. She clutched the rifle, her knuckles white. Chayton, who had been gathering firewood nearby, emerged from the trees, his movements fluid and alert. He looked towards the direction of the sound, his expression unreadable. "Your father," he stated, not a question. "He must have sent men," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling. I can't go back." Chayton met her gaze, his dark eyes holding a steady resolve. "You have a choice, Eleanor. You are no longer his possession." Just then, two figures on horseback appeared at the edge of the clearing. They were ranch hands, men Eleanor recognized from the Vance homestead. Their faces were grim, their eyes scanning the small cabin with suspicion. They stopped their horses a few yards away, their hands resting near the holsters of their pistols. "Miss Vance?" one of them called out, his voice rough. "Mr. Vance sent us. Said you were sick and needed bringing home." Eleanor remained silent, her grip tightening on the rifle. She looked at Chayton, who stood a silent, imposing figure beside her. The other ranch hand, a burly man with a scarred face, squinted at Chayton. "Who's your friend there? Ain't seen no Indians this far out." His tone was laced with suspicion and a hint of hostility. He's been helping me," Eleanor said, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I'm not well enough to travel back yet. I'm staying here." The scarred man scoffed. "Staying here, in this hovel? Your father wants you back at the manor. He's worried sick." The lie was thinly veiled. Silas Vance did not worry. He commanded. "My father cast me out," Eleanor stated, the words clear and firm, silencing the ranch hand. "I am not returning." The two men exchanged a look, their bravado faltering slightly in the face of Eleanor's resolve and the quiet, watchful presence of Chayton. They had been given an order, but also a clear indication that their mission was unwanted, perhaps even unwelcome. "He'll be furious," the first ranch hand muttered, more to himself than to Eleanor. "That's his concern," Eleanor replied, her gaze unwavering. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to rest." The ranch hands, clearly uncomfortable, wheeled their horses around and rode off, their horses' hooves kicking up dust that settled over the clearing like a shroud. Eleanor watched them go, a sense of liberation washing over her. She had defied her father, and the world had not ended. As the dust settled, Chayton spoke, his voice soft. "You are finding your voice, Eleanor." "It is a strong voice." Eleanor looked at him, a tentative smile touching her lips. "Thanks to you." "No," Chayton corrected gently. "Thanks to the strength that was always within you. You simply needed a quiet place to hear it." He gestured towards the north. "My people await. Are you ready to travel?" Eleanor took a deep breath, the scent of pine filling her lungs. She looked back at the desolate cabin, the scene of her abandonment. Then she turned her gaze towards the distant mountains, towards the promise of a new beginning. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "I'm ready." The shadow of her past was still present, but for the first time, Eleanor Vance felt the possibility of stepping into the light. The journey north was arduous, but imbued with a sense of purpose Eleanor hadn't felt before. Chayton led the way, his movements economical and sure-footed, navigating the rugged terrain with an ease born of a lifetime spent in the wilderness. Eleanor, though still weakened, followed closely, her initial trepidation slowly giving way to a growing sense of wonder. Chayton's knowledge of the land was profound. He pointed out edible plants, explained the habits of the local wildlife, and spoke of the spirits of the mountains and rivers, not as a superstition, but as a deep respect for the interconnectedness of all living things. Eleanor listened, captivated, her understanding of the world expanding with each mile they traversed. The harsh beauty of the landscape, which had once seemed so threatening, now began to reveal its intricate details, its subtle rhythms. They traveled mostly on foot. Chayton's pace adjusted to Eleanor's recovering strength. He carried a pack containing their supplies, moving with a silent efficiency that Eleanor envied. When night fell, he would find a sheltered spot, build a fire, and prepare their simple meals. He shared stories of his people, of their traditions, their history, their struggles. He spoke of the encroachment of the settlers, the broken treaties, the constant pressure on their ancestral lands, But he spoke without bitterness, with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. "We have always lived with the land," Chayton explained one evening, as they sat by the fire under a canopy of stars so bright they seemed to hum. "It sustains us, and we honor it in return. This is the balance. But the white man, he sees the land as something to be owned, to be conquered, to be broken." Eleanor listened, her heart heavy. She recognized the echoes of her father's ambition in those words, the relentless drive to control and possess. Silas Vance's world, built on dominion over nature and man alike, suddenly seemed small and hollow compared to the expansive, respectful worldview Chayton described. "My father," she said softly, "he believes in strength through dominance. He sees weakness as something to be eradicated." Chayton looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "True strength, Eleanor, is not in dominating but in enduring. It is in the resilience of the pine that bends in the storm but does not break. It is in the quiet strength of the river that carves its path through stone over centuries. Your father's strength is like a wildfire, powerful, destructive, but ultimately it burns itself out." His words offered a new perspective, a different definition of strength. Eleanor had always associated strength with her father's unwavering resolve, his ability to impose his will on others. Now she began to see a different kind of strength, a quieter, more profound resilience that seemed to emanate from Chayton himself and from the land he revered. As they neared the Apache encampment, the terrain began to change. The rugged hills gave way to a more open valley, dotted with teepees and the signs of a settled yet mobile community. The air filled with the sounds of activity, the laughter of children, the rhythmic pounding of a drum, the distant calls of women tending to their tasks. It was a vibrant, living testament to a culture that, despite the pressures it faced, continued to thrive. Chayton's return was met with quiet nods and respectful greetings from his people. They observed Eleanor with curiosity, their gazes direct but not hostile. She felt a nervous flutter in her stomach, acutely aware of her difference, of the invisible barrier that separated her from this community. Chayton led her towards a particular teepee, larger and more elaborately decorated than the others. "This is where my sister Nala resides," he announced. "She is our healer. She will tend to you." As they approached, a woman emerged from the teepee. She was older than Chayton, her face lined with experience, her eyes sharp and knowing. She wore similar clothing, adorned with intricate beadwork, and carried herself with an air of quiet authority. This was Nala. Nala's gaze fell upon Eleanor, her eyes scrutinizing her from head to toe. There was no immediate warmth, no outward display of welcome, but neither was there any overt suspicion. She simply observed, her expression neutral. "Chayton," Nala said, her voice deeper and more resonant than his, carrying an authority that was unmistakable. "You have brought a stranger." "She was alone and ill, sister," Chayton replied, his tone deferential. "She needed help, my help, and yours." Nala's gaze returned to Eleanor, a subtle shift in her expression. She saw the lingering paleness in Eleanor's face, the weariness in her eyes. "The white man's sickness," Nala stated, a hint of weariness in her own voice. "It travels fast, but the spirit is resilient, if given the chance." She turned to Eleanor. "You are welcome here, as long as you respect our ways. We offer healing, not judgment." Eleanor, overwhelmed by the quiet acceptance, managed a small nod, her throat tight with emotion. She looked at Nala, then at Chayton, standing steadfast beside her. The journey north had been more than just a physical trek. It had been a journey away from the cold confines of her father's world and towards a place of unexpected warmth and understanding. She was a stranger, an outsider, but for the first time in a long time, Eleanor Vance felt a flicker of hope, a sense that she might, just might, find a new kind of home. Nala's teepee was a sanctuary of herbs, dried plants, and woven baskets. The air was thick with the mingled scents of sage, cedar, and other medicinal fragrances Eleanor couldn't identify. Sunlight streamed through the carefully arranged animal skins that formed the walls, casting a warm, diffused glow. Nala moved with an unhurried grace, her hands, though weathered, possessing a delicate precision as she worked with her remedies. Eleanor, now a patient under Nala's care, felt a strange mix of vulnerability and comfort. Nala's methods were far removed from the sterile, often unpleasant treatments of Dr. Finch. She brewed teas from roots and leaves, applied salves made from poultices, and often simply sat with Eleanor, her presence a calming balm. There were no harsh words, no accusations, only a quiet, steady focus on restoring Eleanor's health. "Your body is like the land, Eleanor," Nala explained one afternoon as she ground herbs with a stone pestle. "It needs to be understood, respected. When it is out of balance, it cries out. Your father, he did not hear its cry. He only heard his own demands." Eleanor watched Nala work, mesmerized by her knowledge. "How do you know so much about these plants?" she asked. Nala smiled, a rare, gentle expression that softened the lines on her face. "My grandmother taught my mother, who taught me. It is the knowledge passed down through generations, the wisdom of our people, learned from observing the earth. We are part of it, and it is part of us." Chaitan visited daily, his presence a constant reassurance. He would sit with Eleanor and Nala, sharing news of the encampment, or simply sitting in quiet companionship. He and Nala spoke in their native tongue, their conversations flowing easily, a testament to their deep bond. Eleanor, though unable to understand their words, sensed the affection and respect between them. One evening, as Eleanor's strength began to return more noticeably, Nala brought her a new tonic, darker and more potent than the previous ones. "This will clear the last of the sickness," Nala said, "but it will also awaken what has been sleeping within you." Eleanor drank it. It was bitter, earthy, and for a moment she felt a wave of dizziness, a sense of disorientation. The scents in the teepee seemed to intensify. The colors of the beadwork grew more vibrant. It was as if her senses, dulled by illness and despair, were being sharply honed. As the disorientation passed, a profound sense of clarity settled over Eleanor. She looked at Nala, at the intricate patterns of her clothing, the wisdom in her eyes. She looked at Chaitan, his quiet strength a silent testament to his people's resilience. She thought of her father, his cold heart, his obsession with wealth and control. A new understanding began to dawn within her. Her father's world was built on a foundation of fear and isolation. Nala's world and Chaitan's was built on connection, respect, and the enduring power of community. I don't want to go back," Eleanor confessed, the words escaping her before she could fully formulate them. The confession hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Nala looked at her, her gaze steady. "Where is it you wish to go, child?" Eleanor hesitated. The question was monumental. Her past offered rejection. Her future was uncertain. But the present, here in this peaceful valley with these kind people, felt more like home than the Vance Manor ever had. "I don't know," she admitted, "but not there, not back to him. I want to learn, to understand." Chaitan, who'd been listening silently, spoke for the first time. "There is much to learn, Eleanor. About the land, about our ways, about yourself." Nala nodded. "The white man's world. It is a world of division, of taking. Our world is one of balance, of giving and receiving. If you wish to learn, you must open your heart to it. You must understand that you are no longer Eleanor Vance, the outcast daughter. You are Eleanor, a guest among us, with the potential to become something more." The words were a profound gift, a release from the identity that had defined and imprisoned her for so long. To be seen not as an outcast, but as a person with potential, was a revelation. Eleanor looked at Nala, gratitude swelling in her chest. "I want to learn," she said, her voice firm and clear. "I want to understand." Nala's smile returned, warmer this time. "Then rest, Eleanor. Heal fully. For when the body is strong, the mind and spirit can truly begin to grow." As Eleanor settled back onto her pallet, a sense of peace washed over her. The journey north had led her to an unlikely sanctuary, and in the wisdom of Nala, she was beginning to find not just healing, but a new path, a new identity, forged in the heart of a world far removed from the cold, sterile halls of her father's ambition. Weeks turned into a month. Eleanor's recovery was slow, but steady. Under Nala's watchful eye and Chaitan's quiet support, she regained her strength and her color. The pale, feverish girl who had been abandoned at the trapper's cabin was slowly transforming. Her movements became more fluid, her eyes brighter, and a nascent spark of resilience began to glow within her. She spent her days assisting Nala in the teepee, learning to identify medicinal plants, to prepare poultices and to grind herbs. She learned the rhythms of the encampment, the communal meals, the evening gatherings around the fires where stories were shared, and songs were sung. She was no longer an outcast, but a participant, a student, slowly integrating into the fabric of the Apache community. Chaitin, when not engaged in hunting or other responsibilities, often sought Eleanor out. They would walk together through the valley, he pointing out the subtle signs of the changing seasons, the tracks of animals, the ancient trails of his ancestors. He spoke of the history of his people, their deep connection to the land, and the injustices they had suffered. Eleanor, in turn, shared what little she knew of the outside world. Her descriptions often met with a quiet bewilderment by Chaitin, who found the settlers' focus on material wealth and conquest baffling. "Your father," Chaitin mused one afternoon as they sat overlooking a vast canyon, its sheer walls painted with the colors of the setting sun. "He seeks to own the land, to control it. But the land cannot be owned. It can only be respected. It is our mother, our provider." Helena gazed at the breathtaking vista, the immense scale of it dwarfing her own personal struggles. "He sees only what he can take," she replied, a new understanding dawning in her. "He never learned to see what is given." The canyon, a place of immense natural beauty and spiritual significance for the Apache, became a frequent destination for Eleanor. Chaitin had brought her here, explaining its importance. "This place," he had said, "holds the whispers of our ancestors. If you listen closely, you can hear their wisdom." One day, as they sat in contemplative silence, the wind swirling around them, Eleanor confessed a deep-seated fear that still lingered. "My father, what if he sends more men? What if he tries to take me back?" Chaitin turned to her, his expression serious. "He may try. His pride will not allow him to forget such a slight. But you are no longer the girl he cast out. You have grown. You have learned." He gestured to the surrounding wilderness. "This land is vast, and our people, we are not easily deterred. We protect our own." Eleanor took comfort in his words, but the fear of her father's relentless pursuit remained a subtle undercurrent. She knew Silas Vance's pride was as formidable as any mountain range. As the days passed, Eleanor began to notice a subtle shift in the dynamics of the encampment. While most of the Apache treated her with polite curiosity, a few of the elders watched her with a guarded reserve. She overheard hushed conversations, caught glimpses of disapproving glances. She understood instinctively that her presence was a point of contention for some. One evening, a stern-faced elder named Kaito approached her as she sat by the fire with Nala and Chaitin. Kaito was known for his traditional views and his deep distrust of outsiders. "Chaitin," Kaito said, his voice rough, his gaze fixed on Eleanor, "you have brought a white woman into our midst. She is not of our blood. She does not understand our ways. Her father is a man who has taken much from our people. Is this wise?" Chaitin stood, his posture calm but firm. "She was dying, elder. Nala healed her. She has shown respect for our ways. She seeks to learn." Kaito's eyes narrowed. "The white man brings only trouble. His ways are not our ways. His heart is hard." He looked directly at Eleanor. "You are a shadow of the man who hunts us. How can we trust you?" Eleanor's heart sank. The whispers of the past, the prejudices she had tried to shed, were now being leveled against her. She looked at Nala, whose expression remained serene, and at Chaitin, whose resolve did not waver. This was her test. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor rose. Her voice, though still soft, carried a newfound clarity. "Elder Kaito," she began, her gaze meeting his directly, "I cannot change where I was born, or the man my father is, but I can choose who I am. I have seen the destruction my father's ways bring. I have learned from Nala the importance of balance, of respect for the land, and for others. I do not seek to take. I seek only to understand. If you grant me the chance, I will prove that my heart is not hard, and that I can be a friend, not a shadow." A hush fell over the gathering. Kaito studied Eleanor for a long moment, his stern expression unyielding. The wind whispered through the canyon, as if holding its breath, waiting for his judgment. The whispering canyon seemed to hold the weight of generations, of ancient grievances, and of a fragile, emerging hope. The silence that followed Eleanor's plea stretched, taut and heavy under the vast star-dusted sky. Elder Kaito's gaze, sharp and penetrating, remained fixed on her, a lifetime of suspicion etched into the lines of his face. He had seen the damage wrought by Silas Vance and men like him, the stolen lands, the broken promises, the systematic erosion of his people's way of life. To embrace a white woman, even one claiming a change of heart, was to court a danger many of the elders felt was too great. Finally, Kaito spoke, his voice a low rumble that commanded attention. Words are wind, girl. They blow where they will and are gone. Actions are stone. They remain and they build, or they crush. He gestured dismissively. You speak of learning, of respect. But your father is a man who rides roughshod over all that. His shadow is long. How can we be sure you are not merely a different kind of predator, sent to spy or to deceive? Eleanor felt a tremor of fear, but she held her ground. She looked at Chaitan, who offered a subtle nod of encouragement, and then at Nala, whose calm gaze conveyed unwavering support. This was not merely about her acceptance. It was about bridging a chasm of mistrust, a chasm that had been carved by generations of conflict. Elder, Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, my father's actions are his own. I cannot erase his past, but I can strive to build a different future. I have seen the harm his ambition has caused, and I reject it. I have been shown kindness here, a kindness my own father denied me. I have learned from Nala the importance of healing, and from Chaitan the value of living in harmony with the earth. If I am a shadow, it is only the shadow of a past I am desperately trying to escape. Grant me the opportunity to prove that I can cast my own light. She took a step forward, her eyes earnest. I wish to learn your ways, not to exploit them, but to understand them, to honor them. If my presence here causes fear or mistrust, then I will leave. But I pray you will give me a chance to show you that not all white people are like my father. A low murmur rippled through the assembled members of the encampment. Nala stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Eleanor's shoulder. Kaito, she said, her voice calm and authoritative. This young woman has been under my care. I have seen her spirit heal, her heart soften. She has shown genuine respect for our ways. She has learned much. We cannot turn away someone who seeks understanding, especially when that understanding can build bridges rather than walls. Chaitan added, she has proven her courage. She defied her father to come here. She has faced hardship and has chosen to learn, not to flee. Her heart is not hard, Elder. It has been wounded, but it seeks healing, not power. Kaito remained silent for a long moment, his gaze sweeping over Eleanor, Nala, and Chaitan. The wind picked up, swirling dust around their feet, a restless omen. The air grew colder, the stars seemed to dim as clouds began to gather overhead, a prelude to a brewing storm. Finally, Kaito exhaled, a deep, weary sound. The sky darkens. A storm approaches. Such is the way of the world, bringing both destruction and renewal. He looked directly at Eleanor. You say you wish to learn. Very well, you will learn, but learn keenly. Our ways are not a game. Our traditions are sacred. And the trust you seek must be earned day by day, action by action. Do not mistake our patience for weakness. The storm that approaches, it is a reminder that even the strongest storms can reshape the land. Let us hope you are here to witness that reshaping, not to be swept away by it. A collective sigh of relief swept through the encampment. Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude, a weight lifting from her shoulders. She had faced the judgment of the elders and had been granted a chance. As if on cue, the first drops of rain began to fall, large and heavy, splattering on the dry earth. The wind howled, carrying the scent of ozone and approaching rain. The storm had arrived, mirroring the turbulence and change that was now unfolding in Eleanor's life. She looked at Chaitan, at Nala, at the faces of the Apache people, a mix of apprehension and a determined hope filling her heart. Her journey had led her to this point, and as the storm broke around them, she knew that her transformation was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning. The arid wind, a constant companion in the vast New Mexico territory, carried the scent of dust, sagebrush, and the faint metallic tang of blood. Sarah, shivering despite the rough wool blanket, huddled closer to the dying embers of the fire. The Apache encampment, a temporary scattering of teepees and lean-tos, was a stark contrast to the opulent, if cold, halls of her father's sprawling ranch. Each rustle of canvas, each guttural murmur of conversation, sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. She was an alien here, a creature of privilege adrift in a world of stark survival. Old Man Hemlock, his face a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles, had been the one to find her. He'd stumbled upon her near the dried-up creek bed, a pitiful heap of sodden calico and feverish desperation. He hadn't judged, hadn't questioned the fine, though torn fabric of her dress. He'd simply seen a human in need and, with the quiet stoicism of a man who'd faced down more than his share of life's harsh realities, had brought her to his people. Her fever had raged for days, a relentless tide that blurred the edges of her consciousness. She drifted in and out of a hazy reality, the faces of her father, her mother, and the stern, unyielding visage of Judge Sterling, the man who'd overseen her father's affairs, swimming in and out of focus. But it was a new face that had begun to solidify in the latter stages of her delirium, the gentle, concerned eyes of the young Apache woman named Ilara. Ilara, daughter of the chieftain, had been tasked with her care. She moved with a quiet grace. Her hands, though calloused from years of work, were surprisingly gentle as she bathed Sarah's burning forehead with cool, damp cloths. She spoke in a soft, lilting tongue that Sarah couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear in her touch, in the way she soothed Sarah's brow, in the patient way she spoon-fed her thin broth. It was a language of compassion, a universal dialect that transcended words. Sarah tried to recall the events that had led her here. Her father's fury, a storm of epic proportions, had erupted when he discovered her secret correspondence with Thomas, the stable hand, the accusations, the shame, the ultimate decree of banishment. It all felt like a nightmare from which she was still struggling to awaken. Her father, a man who valued reputation and propriety above all else, had declared her an embarrassment, a stain upon his esteemed name. He'd ordered her out, with nothing but the clothes on her back, into the unforgiving embrace of the territory. He hadn't cared that the fever had already begun to grip her, had already stolen her strength. "You are safe now." Hemlock's voice, a gravelly rumble, broke into her thoughts. He sat near the fire, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. "Ilara has a gift. She knows the herbs, the ways of healing. She will see you through this." Sarah nodded, her throat too dry to speak. She looked towards the largest teepee where Ilara resided. The thought of this young woman, so different from anyone she had ever known, tending to her with such selfless care, was a profound revelation. Her father had taught her that the world was divided into classes, into those who owned and those who served. He had never taught her that kindness could bloom in the most unexpected of soil, or that salvation could come from those he would likely deem savages. The wind whispered secrets through the camp, and for the first time, Sarah felt a flicker of hope, a fragile tendril of possibility in the vast, desolate landscape of her despair. Ilara worked with a quiet intensity, her movements precise and economical. The air in her teepee was thick with the earthy aroma of dried herbs, chamomile for sleep, willow bark for pain, and a pungent, bitter concoction she called the breath of the earth for the fever. Sarah, now more lucid, watched her with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The young Apache woman was a stark contrast to the physicians Sarah had known in her brief visits to the city, men in starched collars and black coats, whose sterile instruments and clinical pronouncements often felt more intimidating than reassuring. Ilara's methods were ancient, born of generations of observation and intimate knowledge of the land. She crushed leaves between smooth stones, brewed teas in a small blackened pot, and applied poultices with practiced hands. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, held a depth of understanding that Sarah found both comforting and unsettling. They seemed to see beyond the surface, to the vulnerability and the fear that Sarah tried so desperately to conceal. "Your body is strong," Ilara said, her voice a soft melody, surprisingly clear in the quiet space. Sarah understood more of her words now, a rudimentary comprehension that had begun to dawn with her returning strength. Ilara spoke of the spirit of the body, of how the fever was a cleansing, a battle the body waged to expel impurities. Sarah, accustomed to a world where illness was a weakness to be hidden, found this perspective revolutionary. Her father would have seen her fever as an inconvenience, a sign of her fragility. He would have expected her to fight it off, to be strong, to uphold the image of a healthy, unblemished daughter. He had no patience for such things. "You are lucky," Ilara continued, gently adjusting the blanket around Sarah. "The desert holds many dangers, but it also provides the remedies for what ails us. The old ones taught us well." Sarah remembered the harsh words her father had hurled at her, the contempt in his eyes as he'd ordered her into the carriage, telling the driver to take her as far as the road would go, and then some. He hadn't even allowed her to pack a change of clothes, only the single worn dress she'd been wearing. She'd been cast out, a pariah, with no thought for her well-being. The irony was not lost on her. The man who had preached the importance of family and legacy had shown her the least mercy. "My father," Sarah began, her voice raspy, then faltered. The words felt heavy, too painful to articulate. Ilara paused, her gaze steady and unwavering. She didn't pry, didn't demand an explanation. She simply waited, her presence a silent offering of support. It was in that quiet understanding that Sarah felt a spark of something akin to trust begin to ignite. She was an outsider, a stranger in this land and in this community, yet she was being tended to with a care she had rarely experienced, even in her own home. As the fever began to recede, a gnawing hunger replaced it. Ilara brought her a bowl of stew, a hearty broth filled with tender pieces of meat and wild roots. Sarah ate slowly, savoring each bite. It was simple, unpretentious food, yet it was the most nourishing thing she had tasted in days. The healing was not just in the herbs and the broths, she realized, but in the unwavering kindness, the gentle patience, and the profound respect for life that permeated this encampment. The desert, she was learning, was not just a place of hardship, but a place of resilience and unexpected grace. The days that followed were a slow, arduous climb back to health. Sarah spent her time in Ilara's teepee, the air now filled with the scent of drying herbs and the gentle hum of daily life outside. She learned to distinguish the sounds of the camp, the laughter of children, the rhythmic pounding of hides, the distant call of a hawk. She watched the women as they worked, their movements efficient and purposeful, their faces etched with a quiet strength. One afternoon, while Ilara was out gathering more herbs, Sarah found herself drawn to the edge of the encampment. She sat beneath the shade of a sparse mesquite tree, observing the comings and goings. She saw Ilara's father, Chieftain Blackwood, a man of imposing stature with eyes that seemed to pierce through the vast expanse of the sky. He moved with an aura of quiet authority, his presence commanding respect without the need for harsh words or displays of power. His interactions with his people were marked by a deep understanding, a sense of shared responsibility for their collective well-being. Sarah had always associated power with the booming voice of her father, with his pronouncements that reshaped the lives of everyone around him. Blackwood's power was different, subtler, more intrinsic. It was rooted in wisdom, in empathy, in the deep connection he shared with his people and with the land itself. She watched as a group of young men returned from a hunt, their faces etched with fatigue, but their steps firm. They carried with them the bounty of the desert, a testament to their skill and their reliance on the land. There was a palpable sense of community, of shared purpose that was entirely foreign to Sarah. Her father's world was one of individual ambition, of hierarchies and competition. Here there was a sense of belonging, of interdependence. A sudden image flashed through Sarah's mind, her father's face contorted in rage, his voice echoing with fury as he'd accused her of disgracing him. The memory sent a shiver down her spine. Had he truly believed she was capable of such willful destruction of their family name? Or had he simply seized upon an opportunity to rid himself of a daughter who didn't conform to his rigid expectations? She remembered her mother's quiet pleas for understanding, her hushed attempts to bridge the chasm between father and daughter. But her mother's gentle nature had always been overshadowed by her father's iron will. He had been the absolute ruler of their household, his word law. As Sarah sat there, the vast, indifferent beauty of the desert stretching out before her, a seed of doubt began to sprout in the fertile ground of her fractured self-esteem. She had been taught that her father's judgment was final, his pronouncements irrefutable, but looking at the harmonious, albeit challenging existence of this Apache community, she began to question the very foundations of her upbringing. Was her father's rigid adherence to societal norms and his pursuit of wealth truly the path to a meaningful life? Or had he, in his relentless quest for control, blinded himself to the true values of compassion and connection? The wind carried the whispers of a different way of life, a life lived in balance with nature and with each other, and it began to sow seeds of doubt in Sarah's carefully constructed world. The healing continued, a slow but steady process. Sarah's strength returned, and with it a growing curiosity about her surroundings and the people who inhabited this harsh yet beautiful land. Ilara, sensing Sarah's improved health, began to share more of her world. She taught Sarah the names of the plants, their uses, and the stories woven into their existence. Sarah learned that the prickly pear cactus, which she'd always viewed with fear, was a source of both food and water, its vibrant fruit a burst of sweetness in the arid landscape. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ilara's grandmother, a woman whose eyes held the wisdom of countless seasons, began to speak. Her voice was a low, resonant hum, weaving tales of the tribe's history, of their ancestors who had roamed these lands long before the arrival of the settlers. Sarah listened intently, her earlier anxieties giving way to a deep, almost primal fascination. The stories spoke of a life lived in harmony with the natural world, of a profound respect for the earth and its creatures. They spoke of community, of shared burdens and joys, of a deep interconnectedness that bound them all together. There were no tales of opulent wealth or societal status, only of resilience, courage, and the unwavering spirit of survival. Sarah found herself comparing these narratives to the stories she'd heard growing up. Her father's tales were of conquest, of building empires, of amassing fortunes. They were tales of individual triumph, often at the expense of others. He spoke of civilization as a superior state, of those who lived outside its bounds as uncivilized, as lesser beings. The contrast was stark. Here, in this seemingly primitive encampment, Sarah was witnessing a richness of spirit, a depth of connection that her father's world, with all its material possessions, seemed to lack. She saw how the elders were revered, their wisdom sought and valued. She saw how the children were nurtured, their spirits allowed to flourish. As the grandmother spoke of a time when the white settlers began to encroach upon their ancestral lands, a familiar chill settled over Sarah. She knew this part of the story. It was the story of progress, as her father would call it, the relentless march of expansion, the displacement of native peoples, the subjugation of those who stood in the way. She remembered overhearing hushed conversations between her father and other wealthy ranchers, their discussions filled with talk of land acquisition, of pushing the boundaries, of taming the wild. They spoke of the Native Americans as obstacles, as primitive peoples who needed to be assimilated or removed. A wave of shame washed over Sarah. She was a product of that very system, a beneficiary of its expansionist policies. Her father's wealth, the very foundation of the life she had known, was built in part on the dispossession of these very people. The echoes of her father's dismissive pronouncements about Native Americans, his casual use of derogatory terms, now felt like a betrayal of the humanity she was beginning to witness firsthand. The comfort and care she was receiving from Ilara and her people felt like a profound act of grace, a gentle rebuke to the ingrained prejudices she had unknowingly absorbed. As Sarah's physical strength returned, a new kind of restlessness began to stir within her. The initial shock and fear had subsided, replaced by a quiet determination to understand her place in this new reality. She was no longer the pampered daughter of a wealthy rancher. She was a castaway, adrift in a world that demanded resilience and resourcefulness. She started to offer her help around the camp. At first, her assistance was clumsy and tentative. She struggled with the tasks the Apache women performed with effortless grace, grinding grain, tending to the fires, mending hides. Her hands, accustomed to delicate embroidery and the gentle turning of pages, were ill-suited for the rough work. But she persisted, her determination fueled by a growing sense of gratitude and a dawning realization that she could no longer afford to be helpless. Ilara watched her with a gentle smile, offering quiet guidance and patient encouragement. She showed Sarah how to properly prepare the herbs, how to weave baskets from dried reeds, how to identify the edible berries and roots. Sarah absorbed it all, her mind sharp and eager to learn. She discovered a quiet satisfaction in mastering these new skills, a sense of accomplishment that had been absent in her previous life, where her achievements were largely dictated by her father's expectations. One day, while helping Ilara gather water from a nearby spring, Sarah noticed a group of younger children playing near the edge of the camp. They were laughing and chasing each other, their energy boundless. But one small boy, no older than 5, sat apart, his face etched with a weariness that seemed too old for his years. He coughed frequently, a dry, rasping sound that tugged at Sarah's heart. "He is not well," Ilara said softly, following Sarah's gaze. "The cough troubles him. The elders give him remedies, but it lingers." A surge of something akin to purpose, a feeling Sarah had never experienced before, coursed through her. She thought of the books she had read, the medical texts she had skimmed out of idle curiosity in her father's vast library. She remembered discussions of ailments, of remedies, of the importance of hygiene. These were concepts alien to the Apache way of life, which relied solely on the natural remedies of the earth. "Perhaps," Sarah began hesitantly, her voice gaining a newfound firmness, "there are other ways to help, ways that are not of the earth." Ilara looked at her, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Sarah explained, struggling to articulate the vague recollections, "there are medicines that can be made, certain practices. In my world, we have ways to fight such coughs, to make breathing easier." She knew her knowledge was limited, fragmented, but the desire to help, to contribute in a meaningful way was overwhelming. For the first time since her arrival, Sarah felt a glimmer of her old self, not the pampered daughter, but someone with a potential to make a difference. The thought of being useful, of contributing to the well-being of this community that had shown her such kindness, was a powerful motivator. The harsh realities of her past were beginning to recede, replaced by the promise of a new direction, a new purpose, forged in the crucible of her unexpected circumstances. The idea of introducing her world's medicine to the Apache ways was met with a mixture of skepticism and cautious curiosity. Chieftain Blackwood listened intently, as Sarah, with Ilara translating, explained her limited knowledge of hygiene, of boiling water, of certain simple remedies she vaguely recalled from her father's medical books. She spoke of how germs, unseen things, could cause sickness. Her father's ranch had been equipped with a small but well-stocked medical cabinet, a necessity for tending to the ranch hands and the family. Sarah, in her boredom, had often perused its contents, reading the labels and imagining their uses. She spoke of cleanliness, of washing hands, of keeping wounds clean to prevent infection, concepts that, while perhaps intuitively understood by the Apache in their own way, were not systematically applied. Blackwood, a man of deep wisdom and respect for tradition, pondered her words. He saw the genuine desire to help in Sarah's eyes, a stark contrast to the often exploitative intentions of many white settlers he had encountered. He also saw the pragmatic reality of their lives. Illness was a constant threat, and any potential aid, even from an unfamiliar source, was worth considering. "The Great Spirit provides," he said, his voice calm and measured, "but sometimes it guides us to new paths. Your words carry a different kind of knowledge, Sarah. Ilara will work with you. If these new ways bring healing, then they are welcome. If they cause harm, they will be set aside." This decision marked a turning point for Sarah. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about contributing, about bridging the divide between her past and her present. Ilara, ever the diligent healer, embraced Sarah's suggestions with an open mind. Together, they began to implement small changes. They boiled water for Sarah's broth and for Ilara's poultices. Sarah showed the women how to wash their hands more thoroughly before preparing food, using ash and water as a rudimentary soap. The boy with the persistent cough, named Kalen, became their focus. Ilara continued her herbal remedies, but Sarah insisted on adding a new element, a concoction she vaguely remembered as being made from mullein leaves, a common weed she'd seen growing near the ranch. She also emphasized keeping Kalen's sleeping area as clean as possible and ensuring he received ample rest. The other members of the tribe watched these new practices with a mixture of hope and reservation. They had always trusted the wisdom of their ancestors and the bounty of the earth. This new approach, introduced by an outsider, felt like a departure from their established ways. Some whispered their doubts, their anxieties about straying too far from tradition. Others, particularly the mothers who had seen their children suffer from recurring illnesses, watched with a quiet, desperate hope. Sarah understood their apprehension. She herself felt a constant internal conflict, a lingering guilt about her father's legacy, and a fear of repeating the mistakes of her past. Yet the desire to help Kalen, to prove that her knowledge could be a force for good, propelled her forward. She was walking a divided path, straddling two worlds, hoping to find a way to heal not only Kalen, but perhaps in some small way herself as well. The subtle changes introduced by Sarah and Ilara began to yield noticeable results. Kalen's cough, while not entirely gone, had lessened in frequency and intensity. His breathing seemed less labored, and a touch of color returned to his cheeks. The change was not dramatic, not a miraculous cure, but it was significant enough to turn the tide of doubt among some of the tribe members. "He eats more," Elara observed one evening, her eyes shining with a quiet pride. "And he sleeps more soundly. Your herbs, Sarah, they are potent." Sarah smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. "It is not just the herbs, Elara. It is the care, the clean water, the rest, the washing. It all works together." She explained, as best she could, the concept of fighting unseen enemies, the tiny organisms that could cause sickness. She described how boiling water killed these germs, and how washing hands removed them from the skin. The Apache, accustomed to a world where illness was often attributed to imbalances in the spirit or environmental factors, found this concept of microscopic invaders both alien and intriguing. Old Man Hemlock, who had initially brought Sarah to the camp, watched her with a knowing glint in his eye. He had seen many outsiders come and go, their intentions ranging from benevolent to outright destructive. Sarah, he recognized, was different. She possessed a quiet determination, a genuine empathy, and a willingness to learn and adapt. "The young ones have sharp eyes," Hemlock remarked to Blackwood, gesturing towards Sarah and Kalen, who was now playing a game of chase with another child, his laughter ringing clear in the evening air. "She brings a different kind of medicine, but it seems to soothe what the earth's gifts alone cannot always conquer. Perhaps in this land of harsh truths, there is room for different kinds of healing." Blackwood nodded, his gaze thoughtful. He had seen the fear in the eyes of mothers, whose children were sickly, and he recognized the hope that now flickered within their community. Sarah's arrival had been an accident, a consequence of her father's cruelty, but it had brought with it an unexpected opportunity. "We honor the ways of our ancestors," Blackwood stated, his voice resonating with the weight of tradition. "But we also listen to the whispers of the wind, to the signs the Great Spirit sends us. If this young woman's knowledge helps our people, then we will embrace it. Trust is not given lightly, Sarah," he added, turning his gaze towards her. "But you are earning it, day by day." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of acceptance and belonging that she had never truly experienced before. Her father had always sought to control her, to mold her into a reflection of his own ambitions. Here she was being valued for her own unique contributions, for her willingness to help and learn. The fear that had once consumed her began to recede, replaced by a burgeoning sense of self-worth. She was no longer just a castaway. She was becoming a part of something, a part of this resilient community, and that realization was the most profound healing of all. As Sarah settled deeper into the rhythms of the Apache encampment, her past continued to haunt her in the quiet hours of the night. The image of her father's stern, unforgiving face would often surface, accompanied by the echoes of his harsh words. She wondered if he had even noticed her absence, if her disappearance had caused him any concern beyond the inconvenience it might have presented to his carefully curated image. One sweltering afternoon, as she helped Elara prepare a large batch of dried meat for storage, a small group of riders approached the encampment. Their horses, lathered and weary, spoke of a long journey. The Apache warriors, ever vigilant, moved to a defensive posture, their movements fluid and unhurried. Sarah's heart pounded. She recognized the distinctive style of the horses and the rough, utilitarian clothing of the riders. They were settlers, likely from one of the nearby ranches or towns. Chieftain Blackwood met them with a calm but firm demeanor. Sarah could only catch snippets of the conversation, the unfamiliar dialect of the settlers blending with the Apache tongue. However, she caught enough to understand that they were on patrol, searching for strays or perhaps looking for signs of trouble. One of the men, a burly individual with a weathered face, spoke with an air of authority that Sarah found disturbingly familiar. His tone was dismissive, bordering on contemptuous as he referred to the Apache as "those wild Indians." Sarah's blood ran cold. The man's words, so casually cruel, were a stark reminder of the prejudice that permeated the world she had left behind. She saw a flicker of unease pass through Blackwood's eyes, a subtle tightening of his jaw, but he responded with measured words, assuring the settlers that all was peaceful within their territory. As the riders prepared to depart, one of them, a younger man with a less hardened expression, glanced towards Sarah. His eyes, for a fleeting moment, held a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even recognition. He hesitated, as if about to speak, but then shook his head and mounted his horse. Sarah felt a pang of something she couldn't quite define, a fleeting hope, perhaps, or a deep-seated fear of being discovered. After the settlers rode away, the encampment settled back into its quiet routine, but the encounter had stirred a new undercurrent of anxiety within Sarah. The fragile peace she had found was a delicate thing, constantly threatened by the encroaching world of the settlers. She knew her father's ranch was not far from this territory, and the thought of him sending out search parties, of him discovering her alive and well among the Apache, filled her with dread. He would see it as further disgrace, as a defiance of his authority. Ilara, sensing Sarah's unease, placed a comforting hand on her arm. "They are gone. Your safety is here, with us." Sarah appreciated the reassurance, but a seed of doubt had been planted. How long could she remain hidden? And if she were discovered, what would become of her? And more importantly, what would become of the trust she had so painstakingly earned? The whispers of the frontier, of the expanding dominion of the settlers, were growing louder, and Sarah feared they would soon shatter the peaceful sanctuary she had found. The encounter with the settlers cast a long shadow over the encampment, and particularly over Sarah. The casual racism of the men, their entitled arrogance, served as a brutal reminder of the world she had escaped. It also amplified her fear of discovery. Her father, a man who valued appearances above all else, would be furious to learn that his daughter was not only alive, but living among the very people he so disdained. He would see it as a further humiliation, a stain on his reputation that he would undoubtedly seek to erase. Sarah found herself becoming more watchful, her senses sharpened by a newfound anxiety. Every distant sound, every approaching rider, sent a jolt of apprehension through her. She avoided venturing too far from the camp, and when she did, she stayed close to Ilara. The carefree joy she had begun to experience was now tinged with a persistent fear of what might happen if her father's world intersected with her new one. One evening, while helping Ilara tend to the evening fire, Sarah noticed a lone rider approaching the encampment from a distance. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows across the plains, making it difficult to discern the rider's identity. The Apache warriors tensed, their eyes fixed on the approaching figure. Blackwood, with his usual calm, signaled for them to remain composed. As the rider drew nearer, Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. The silhouette against the fading light was unmistakable. It was a man of considerable size, mounted on a fine, powerful horse. A horse Sarah recognized instantly. It was her father's prized stallion, Thunder. And the man. The man wore a familiar coat, a coat that had hung in her father's closet for years. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was him. Her father, or someone sent by him, had found her. The carefully constructed peace, the budding trust, the tentative steps towards healing, all of it felt as though it were about to shatter. Blackwood, sensing the turmoil radiating from Sarah, placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "He is alone," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "We will speak with him." Sarah could barely stand. Her legs felt like lead. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear into the vastness of the desert. But she knew she couldn't. Her father's arrival would force a confrontation, a reckoning. She had been cast out once, banished from his life. Now, it seemed, he had come to reclaim, or perhaps to punish her further. The shadow of discovery had fallen, and Sarah braced herself for the inevitable storm, unsure if the strength she had found among the Apache would be enough to weather it. The sun beat down relentlessly on the dusty plains, mirroring the internal turmoil raging within Amelia. It had been weeks since she'd last seen her father, weeks since he'd cast her out, a decision that still gnawed at her soul. The fever had finally broken, leaving her weak but alive, a testament to Anya's unwavering care. The small one-room cabin, once a symbol of Amelia's desperate situation, now felt like a sanctuary. Anya, with her weathered hands and kind eyes, had become a beacon of hope in Amelia's darkest hours. She spoke little of her past, but her actions spoke volumes. She'd shared her meager provisions, mended Amelia's tattered clothes, and, most importantly, offered a silent understanding that transcended words. Amelia traced the rough-hewn wooden table with her finger, the faint scent of pine, a comforting presence. Anya was out foraging, a daily ritual that provided them with sustenance. Amelia missed the sprawling ranch, the scent of hay, and even the gruff, distant presence of her father. But that world felt like a lifetime ago, a life she'd been brutally ejected from. The memory of her father's cold gaze, the words that had sliced through her like a knife, were still sharp. "You are no daughter of mine. Get out." He'd said it as if she were a stray dog, not the child he had raised, the child who had once been his pride. She remembered the swift onset of the fever, the chills that racked her body, and the burning heat that followed. She had stumbled away from the ranch, disoriented and terrified, collapsing near Anya's secluded dwelling. If Anya hadn't found her, Amelia shuddered, unwilling to complete the thought. Anya had nursed her back to health with a quiet determination, her knowledge of herbs and remedies proving invaluable. The Apache tribe of whom Anya was a part were a mystery to Amelia. She'd only ever seen them from a distance, their figures moving with a grace and self-possession that spoke of a deep connection to the land. Anya was an anomaly, an outcast perhaps, living apart from her people, yet carrying their wisdom in her heart. Amelia felt a growing sense of gratitude, an emotion so profound it was almost overwhelming. Anya had saved her, not just from the fever, but from a despair that threatened to consume her. A rustle at the door announced Anya's return. She entered, her basket laden with wild berries and roots. A faint smile touched her lips as she saw Amelia awake and alert. "You are strong, little one," Anya said, her voice a low, melodic hum. "The sun has given you back its warmth." Amelia nodded, pushing herself up straighter. "Thank you, Anya, for everything." Anya placed the basket on the table and began sorting its contents. "Gratitude is a seed. Plant it well, and it will bear fruit." She looked at Amelia, her gaze steady. "Your father, he is a hard man. Like the desert rock, he does not yield easily." The mention of her father sent a fresh wave of pain through Amelia. "He hates me," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Hate is a heavy burden," Anya replied, her tone gentle. "Sometimes those who carry it the most are the ones who are hurting the deepest, but it does not excuse their actions." She handed Amelia a handful of berries. "Eat. You need your strength." As Amelia ate, a new resolve began to form within her. She couldn't stay hidden away forever. She had been wronged, yes, but she was not broken. She had Anya, who had shown her a kindness she hadn't thought possible, and she had her own resilience, a spirit that, despite everything, refused to be extinguished. The path ahead was uncertain, shrouded in the same dust that blanketed the plains, but for the first time in weeks, Amelia felt a flicker of hope. She would survive. And perhaps one day she would understand, or perhaps she would simply find her own way, her own strength, her own peace, far from the shadow of her father's rejection. The Old West was a harsh mistress, but Amelia was discovering a resilience she never knew she possessed, forged in the crucible of loss and sustained by the unexpected warmth of a stranger's kindness. The journey back to herself, she realized, would be as arduous as any trek across this unforgiving landscape. The days settled into a quiet rhythm. Amelia, still recovering her full strength, helped Anya with her daily tasks. She learned to identify edible plants, to gather dry wood for their small fire, and to observe the subtle signs of the changing weather. Anya, in turn, shared fragments of her life, stories of her people, their traditions, and their deep reverence for the natural world. Amelia absorbed it all, a thirsty sponge soaking up knowledge and a sense of peace she hadn't realized she'd been missing. The constant anxiety that had plagued her since her father's cruel decree began to recede, replaced by a quiet determination. One afternoon, as they sat by the fire, Anya spoke of her own estrangement from her tribe. "The elders said I spoke too freely with the white settlers," she explained, her gaze distant. "They did not understand that knowledge should be shared, not hoarded, and they did not understand that some of us are born with a spirit that cannot be confined by tradition." She looked at Amelia, her dark eyes holding a familiar kindness. "Like you, perhaps. You have a fire within you even when you are weak." Amelia felt a blush creep up her neck. "I don't know about that," she murmured. "I just want to understand why he—" She trailed off, the pain of her father's rejection still a raw wound. "Understanding may come," Anya said softly, "or it may not, but you cannot let his actions define your worth. Your father, he sees the world through a narrow lens. He values possessions, status, what others think. He has forgotten the true wealth of a person, their spirit, their kindness, their strength." Amelia nodded, the truth of Anya's words resonating deeply. She thought of her father's obsession with his vast ranch, the prize cattle, the reputation he so fiercely guarded. It had always seemed to come before his family, before her mother, and now, before her. She recalled moments from her childhood, fleeting instances where he'd shown a spark of affection, only for it to be quickly extinguished by his stern pragmatism. He was different when Mama was alive, Amelia confessed, the memory of her mother a bittersweet ache. He used to smile more. He'd even tell me stories. Anya nodded. Loss can harden a man, or it can break him. Your father seems to have chosen the former. But the desert, like life, can also shape and refine. It can carve away the unnecessary, leaving only what is true and strong. She gestured to the landscape stretching out before them, vast and seemingly empty, yet teeming with hidden life. You are like a sapling in this desert, Amelia, tested by the wind and the sun, but with roots that are growing deeper. A sudden commotion broke the peaceful scene. The sound of horses, closer than usual, sent a jolt of fear through Amelia. She instinctively moved closer to Anya, her heart pounding. Anya, however, remained calm. She rose slowly and peered towards the source of the noise. "Riders," Anya announced, her voice devoid of panic. "They are heading this way." Amelia's mind immediately flashed to her father. Could he have sent someone to search for her? Or worse, to drag her back, only to cast her out again? The thought was terrifying. She hadn't seen him since he'd banished her, and the humiliation was still too raw to face. "We should hide," Amelia whispered, her voice trembling. Anya placed a hand on Amelia's arm, her touch firm and reassuring. "There is no need to hide, Amelia. Let us see who approaches. Perhaps it is not the shadow you fear." As the riders drew nearer, Amelia could make out their forms. They were not cowboys from her father's ranch. They wore the distinctive attire of the Apache, their horses moving with effortless power. At their head rode a stern-faced man, his eyes scanning the small dwelling with an intensity that made Amelia's breath catch. Beside him, however, rode a younger man, his gaze softer, more curious. Anya stepped forward, her posture one of quiet dignity. She raised a hand in greeting. The stern-faced man stopped, his eyes fixed on Anya. A moment of tense silence stretched between them, the vastness of the desert amplifying the quiet drama. Amelia watched, her breath held, unsure of what would unfold. The leader of the Apache riders, a man whose weathered face bore the map of 1,000 sunrises, regarded Anya with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. His name was Chaitan, and he was a respected warrior within his band. He knew Anya, or at least he knew of her. Her solitary existence on the fringes of their territory was a topic of quiet speculation. He had heard whispers that she possessed a unique knowledge, a connection to the old ways that had been lost to many. "Anya," Chaitan stated, his voice deep and resonant, like stones grinding together. "You live far from your people." Anya inclined her head slightly. "The land provides for those who listen, Chaitan, and my path has led me here." She gestured subtly towards Amelia, who stood a few paces behind her, her eyes wide with apprehension. "This young woman was found near death. I have been caring for her." Chaitan's gaze shifted to Amelia. He took in her pale complexion, her still fragile frame, and the fear that flickered in her eyes. He saw the remnants of a life lived in comfort, now reduced to hardship. He recognized the look of someone who had been cast adrift. "She is not of our people," Chaitan stated, his tone neutral. "No," Anya agreed, "she is not, but she is a soul in need, and kindness does not recognize tribal lines." A younger warrior, his face smoother and his eyes bright with youthful curiosity, dismounted and approached Amelia. His name was Kalen, and he was Chaitan's nephew. He had heard tales of the white settlers and their sprawling ranches, but he had never encountered one up close. Amelia, in her simple mended dress, her hair a tangled cascade, seemed both vulnerable and defiant. Kalen offered Amelia a small, shy smile. He spoke in a rough, halting English, a language he was still mastering. "You... well?" Amelia, surprised by his gentle demeanor, managed a small nod. "I am getting better. Thank you." Chaitan watched the exchange, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He understood Anya's compassion, for he too had known loss and hardship. But he was also a leader, responsible for the safety and well-being of his people. He could not afford to be swayed by sentiment alone. "Her people," Chaitan said, turning back to Anya. "Do they know she is here? Will they come looking for her?" Anya's gaze met Chaitan's, steady and unwavering. Her father cast her out. She has no one else. The words hung in the air, a stark declaration of Amelia's abandonment. Chaitan processed this information. A daughter cast out by her own father. It was a harshness he understood, though the reasons remained a mystery. He looked again at Amelia, at the subtle pride in her bearing, the spark of defiance that even her weakness could not extinguish. He saw a reflection of the resilience he admired in his own people. "The land is vast," Chaitan said, his tone softening slightly, "and it can be unforgiving to those who travel alone, especially a young woman. The rains are coming, and the winter is not far behind." He paused, considering. "My people are preparing to move to our winter hunting grounds. It is a long journey." Amelia's heart sank. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that they might offer her some form of shelter, some guidance. Anya, however, seemed to anticipate Chaitan's concern. "She can help me with the preparations. She is strong now, and she learns quickly." Chaitan considered Anya's words, then looked at Amelia, his gaze piercing. "You have lost much," he said, his voice low, "but you still stand. That is a valuable quality." He turned to Kalen. "Kalen, you will stay. Help Anya and this daughter of the White Rancher. Prepare. Ensure they have enough supplies for the journey ahead, should they choose to make one." Kalen's eyes lit up. He nodded eagerly. "Yes, Uncle." Chaitan gave a curt nod. "We will return before the first snow. Be ready." He remounted his horse, his warriors following suit. With a final appraising glance at Amelia, he wheeled his horse around and they rode off, their forms quickly becoming distant specks against the vast ochre landscape. Amelia watched them go, a strange mix of relief and uncertainty swirling within her. Kalen turned to her, his earlier shyness replaced by an eager enthusiasm. "My uncle is a man of few words," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "But he is fair, and he respects strength." He gestured towards Anya's cabin. "We have much to do. The winter is a hungry wolf." The departure of Chaitan and his warriors left a palpable quiet in its wake, a silence that seemed to amplify the vastness of the surrounding desert. Kalen, however, filled the air with a new energy. He was young, barely out of his teens, but possessed a deep knowledge of the land and its rhythms, a heritage passed down through generations of his people. His initial shyness around Amelia had evaporated, replaced by an open curiosity and a friendly helpfulness. "My uncle is right," Kalen said, his eyes bright as he surveyed Anya's modest dwelling and the small plot of land around it. "We must prepare. The desert does not forgive unpreparedness." He began to organize their meager stores of dried meat, nuts and seeds, his movements efficient and purposeful. "Anya is wise. She knows the plants, the seasons, but even the wisest need a strong hand to gather and carry." Amelia, feeling a renewed sense of purpose, readily joined him. She was no longer the helpless, feverish girl who had stumbled upon Anya's cabin. Her strength was returning, and with it, a desire to contribute, to be useful. She worked alongside Kalen, her hands learning the texture of dried hides, the weight of water skins, the art of packing them tightly for travel. "Where do you go for the winter?" Amelia asked, her voice steady as she helped Kalen secure a bundle of firewood onto a sturdy packhorse. Kalen gestured towards the distant mountains, their peaks tinged with the first hints of autumn's chill. "To the foothills. There are more game, and the snow is not as deep as in the high peaks. We hunt deer, elk. We gather what the land offers." He looked at Amelia, his gaze earnest. "It is a good life. Hard, yes, but honest. We take only what we need. We respect the balance." Amelia found herself drawn to Kalen's simple philosophy. It was a stark contrast to the relentless pursuit of wealth and status that had defined her father's world. "My father," she began, then hesitated. It was still difficult to speak his name. "He values his cattle above all else. He wants to be the wealthiest rancher in the territory." Kalen nodded slowly, as if understanding a concept that was foreign, yet not entirely alien. "Wealth is in the land, in the herd that runs free, in the health of your family, not in counting stones in a box." He paused, then added with a touch of youthful idealism, "and in the stories you share around the fire." Anya, busy mending a torn canvas bag, listened to their conversation with a quiet smile. She appreciated Kalen's presence. He brought a lightness, a youthful energy that complemented her own steady calm, and he treated Amelia with a respect that her father had denied her. As they worked, a comfortable camaraderie began to develop between Amelia and Kaelin. They shared stories, though Amelia's were tinged with the sorrow of her past, while Kaelin spoke of youthful adventures and the simple joys of his people. He taught her a few words of his native language, and she in turn shared snippets of the stories she'd read as a child, tales of faraway lands and brave heroes. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Kaelin pointed to a distant mesa. "My grandfather used to tell stories of that place," he said, his voice hushed with reverence. "He said that the spirits of our ancestors watch over us from there. When the wind whispers through the rocks, it is them speaking to us." Amelia looked towards the mesa, a sense of awe washing over her. It was a landscape imbued with a deep spiritual significance, a contrast to the purely utilitarian view of the land she'd been raised with. "My father sees the land as something to be conquered, to be owned," she murmured, almost to herself. "The land is not owned," Kaelin replied gently. "It is lived upon. It is respected. It gives life, and it asks for respect in return. It is a lesson many white settlers have yet to learn." The conversation turned to Amelia's father. Kaelin, sensing her lingering pain, asked, "Why did he cast you out?" Amelia's voice grew small. I was ill, with a fever. He said I was a burden, that he could not afford to have me sick, especially with the drought affecting the cattle." The words choked her. The sheer callousness of his reasoning still made her recoil. Kaelin's brow furrowed. He looked at Amelia with a mixture of sadness and quiet anger. "That is a cruel heart," he stated simply. "A father's duty is to his child, especially when they are weak, not to his cattle." Anya, overhearing the exchange, added, her voice firm, "Your father's heart has grown cold, Amelia, but yours is still warm. Do not let his coldness freeze you." Amelia felt a surge of gratitude for Anya and Kaelin. In their simple, honest world, she was finding a different kind of strength, a resilience that came not from material wealth, but from human connection and a respect for life. As they continued their preparations, the looming journey with the Apache tribe felt less like an imposition and more like a new, albeit uncertain, chapter in her unfolding story. The Old West, she was discovering, held many paths, and for the first time, she felt she might be able to forge her own, even without the guiding hand of her father. The days leading up to the departure of Chaitin's band were a blur of activity. Amelia, with Kaelin's energetic guidance and Anya's quiet wisdom, worked tirelessly. She learned to distinguish the various calls of the birds, an important skill for understanding the weather and the presence of game. She helped Anya prepare medicinal poultices and tinctures, her nimble fingers surprisingly adept at grinding herbs and mixing salves. The physical labor, while demanding, was invigorating. It kept her mind from dwelling too much on the past and gave her a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in years. Kaelin, meanwhile, was a constant source of cheerful industry. He was patient with Amelia's lack of knowledge, never making her feel foolish for her questions. He taught her how to read the tracks of animals, how to find water even in seemingly dry creek beds, and how to identify the edible roots that Anya sometimes missed. His laughter, bright and uninhibited, often echoed across the small clearing, a welcome counterpoint to the stark silence of the desert. "You have a good eye, Amelia," Kaelin praised one afternoon as they were gathering dried tumbleweeds for fuel. "You found more than I did in that patch." Amelia smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that felt unfamiliar on her lips. "Anya has taught me well, and you have shown me where to look." Anya, tending to a small fire, watched them with a knowing glint in her eyes. She saw the burgeoning friendship between the young woman and the young warrior, a connection forming naturally, unburdened by the prejudices and expectations of their respective worlds. One evening, as they sat around the crackling fire, the stars blazing in the inky black sky like scattered diamonds, Kaelin began to tell a story. It was a traditional Apache tale, a legend passed down through generations, about a great hunter who learned the importance of humility from a wise old coyote. His voice, usually lively, took on a more somber, rhythmic tone as he recounted the hero's trials and his eventual understanding of the interconnectedness of all living things. Amelia listened, captivated. The story was rich with imagery, the desert landscape itself a character in the narrative. She imagined the hunter, his eyes sharp, his movements silent, Moving through the same vastness she now inhabited, she felt a connection to this ancient world, a sense of belonging that had been absent for so long. When Kaelin finished, a comfortable silence settled over them. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the distant howl of a coyote. "It is a good story," Anya murmured, her voice soft. "It teaches us that even the strongest hunter must learn from the smallest creature." Kaelin nodded. "My grandfather used to say that the coyote teaches us to be clever, but also to be patient, to observe, to wait for the right moment." He looked at Amelia, his gaze thoughtful. "Perhaps your father needs to learn from the coyote." The mention of her father, though tinged with a newfound detachment, still pricked at Amelia. "I don't think he listens to anyone," she said, her voice quiet. "He only listens to himself and to his money." "Money is a false god," Anya stated, her voice carrying an unusual edge of weariness. "It promises much, but it nourishes nothing. It is a hunger that is never satisfied." Amelia pondered her words. She had witnessed firsthand the destructive power of her father's obsession with wealth. It had blinded him to her needs, to her very humanity. As the stars wheeled overhead, Amelia felt a growing sense of clarity. She might have been cast out, but she was not lost. She was learning, growing, and finding a resilience within herself that was more valuable than any gold or land. The next morning, Chaitan and his band returned. The air buzzed with anticipation. The horses were rounded up, the pack animals loaded, and the communal fire was extinguished, leaving only the scattered embers, a sign of their departure. Chaitan surveyed their preparations, his expression serious. "The journey will be long," he announced to Anya and Amelia, his voice carrying the authority of a seasoned leader. "The weather can turn quickly. You must be prepared to travel hard and fast when necessary, and you must listen to the land. It will tell you when to rest and when to press on." He looked directly at Amelia. "You have chosen to travel with us. This is not a decision to be taken lightly. Our ways are different. You must respect them, and we will respect you." Amelia met his gaze, her heart thudding but her voice clear. "I understand, Chaitan. I am grateful for your protection, and I will do my best to be a good traveler." Kaelin gave her a reassuring smile. Anya offered a silent nod of support. As the Apache band began to move out, a long serpentine line of horses and people against the stark landscape, Amelia mounted the sturdy horse that Kaelin had prepared for her. She took one last look at the small cabin, the place of her healing and her awakening. Then, with a deep breath, she turned her face towards the horizon, towards the unknown, and rode forward, a new kind of strength blooming within her, nurtured by the kindness of strangers and the resilience of her own spirit. The Old West was a place of harsh realities, but Amelia was discovering its unexpected pockets of humanity, proving that even in desolation, hope could take root. The journey across the arid plains was a stark, beautiful, and often grueling experience. Amelia, nestled within the moving caravan of the Apache band, felt a profound sense of isolation from her former life and a deep immersion into this new one. The vast, unending sky, the shimmering heat haze that distorted the horizon, and the silence that was broken only by the snort of horses, the creak of saddle leather, and the occasional call of a bird, all served to underscore the sheer scale of the world and her own small place within it. Kaelin, ever the considerate companion, ensured Amelia was never left to feel completely adrift. He rode alongside her, offering quiet explanations about the subtle shifts in the terrain, the types of plants they passed, and the ancient trails their people had followed for generations. He pointed out the distant silhouettes of mountains, sharing names and stories associated with each landmark, weaving a tapestry of history and myth that made the landscape come alive. "See that formation?" Kaelin said one afternoon, pointing to a cluster of weathered rocks that resembled a sleeping giant. "Our elders say it is one of the first beings, resting after creating the world. When the wind blows through its ears, it is whispering ancient secrets." Amelia listened, enthralled. Her father's world was defined by fences, ownership, and the tangible value of livestock. This world, by contrast, was rich with intangible meaning, with a profound respect for the earth and its mysteries. She began to notice the small details. The way Anya, riding steadily at the rear of the caravan, would pause to examine a particular plant, or the way Chaitan, leading the group with an unwavering gaze, seemed to commune with the very air around him. One particularly arduous day, a sudden fierce dust storm descended upon them. The wind howled, whipping sand into a frenzy, reducing visibility to mere feet. Amelia's eyes stung, her lungs burned, and the horse beneath her grew skittish. She felt a wave of panic begin to rise, the helplessness of her illness returning with a vengeance. Suddenly, Kalen was beside her, his voice a calm anchor in the roaring chaos. "Stay low, Amelia. Keep your head down. Follow my horse's tail." He guided his mount closer, his own body a shield against the worst of the wind. Anya, too, was nearby, her presence a steadying influence, offering quiet words of encouragement that were almost lost in the gale. When the storm finally abated, leaving behind a world coated in a fine layer of dust, Amelia felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had faced a real danger, and with the help of Anya and Kalen, she had weathered it. It was a small victory, perhaps, but it was hers. "You were very brave," Kalen said, wiping dust from his face. "You did not give in to fear." Amelia managed a weak smile. "You and Anya were there. That made all the difference." Chaitan, his face grim, surveyed the damage. A few supplies had been lost, but thankfully no one was seriously harmed. He approached Anya and Amelia. "The desert tests us," he said, his voice gruff but without malice. "It reminds us that we are small, that we must rely on each other." He looked at Amelia, a subtle nod of acknowledgement in his eyes. "You held strong." As they continued their journey, the landscape slowly began to change. The flat, arid plains gave way to rolling hills, and then to the foothills of the distant mountains. The air grew cooler, and patches of sparse vegetation began to appear. The Apache band moved with a practiced efficiency, their knowledge of the land guiding them unerringly. One evening, they made camp near a small, clear stream. The water was cold and pure, a welcome relief after days of rationed drinking. As Amelia washed the dust from her face, she looked at her reflection in the water. Her skin was tanned, her hands calloused, and her eyes held a new kind of depth. She was still Amelia, the daughter of the wealthy rancher, but she was also something more. She was a survivor, a traveler, a learner. She thought of her father, and the memory no longer brought the sharp sting of pain, but a dull ache of regret, for the man he once was, and for the man he had become. She knew she couldn't change him, but she was changing herself. The Old West, with its harsh realities and its unexpected moments of grace, was shaping her, refining her. Much like Anya had said, the desert shaped and refined. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Amelia felt a quiet confidence that she could face whatever came her way. The Apache band, now a familiar presence in Amelia's life, continued their trek towards their winter hunting grounds. The journey had become less about the physical act of travel and more about the subtle rhythms of communal living. Amelia found herself increasingly attuned to the unspoken communication within the group, the glances between hunters as they scouted for game, the shared laughter around the evening fire, the quiet hum of the women as they worked on preparing hides and mending clothing. She learned to distinguish the different types of wood that burned best, the signs that indicated approaching rain, and the specific calls that alerted the group to the presence of predators. Anya, ever the patient mentor, guided her through these lessons, her knowledge of the natural world seemingly limitless. She would point out the intricate patterns of spiderwebs, the medicinal properties of desert blooms, and the silent communication between the various animals that shared their territory. "The earth speaks in many tongues, Amelia," Anya explained one morning, as they gathered roots near a gnarled mesquite tree. "If you listen with an open heart, you will understand." Kalen, his youthful energy still boundless, was often Amelia's partner in these explorations. He taught her how to set simple snares for small game, a skill that, while rudimentary, instilled in her a sense of self-sufficiency. He also shared more stories, tales of his ancestors, of their battles and their triumphs, of their deep reverence for the land and the spirits that dwelled within it. "My people believe that everything has a spirit," Kalen explained, as they sat by a stream watching dragonflies flit across the water. "The rocks, the trees, the water, the animals, we must treat them with respect, for they are all part of the great circle of life." Amelia found this concept both fascinating and comforting. Her father's worldview had been one of dominance and exploitation. This perspective, however, emphasized harmony and interconnectedness. It suggested a way of living that was sustainable, respectful, and deeply meaningful. One afternoon, As they were traversing a particularly rugged section of the foothills, a lone rider broke away from the main group. It was Chaitan. He rode with a focused intensity, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. The other members of the band slowed their pace, their expressions watchful. "Chaitan has sharp eyes," Kalen murmured to Amelia. "He sees what others miss." After a tense few minutes, Chaitan reined in his horse and waited for them to catch up. His expression was unreadable, but his voice held a new gravity. "We are close to the winter hunting grounds," he announced. "But there is something else. Smoke. From the north. More than a single camp." A ripple of unease went through the group. The presence of other unknown peoples in their territory was always a cause for concern. Could it be other tribes? Amelia asked Kalen, her voice laced with apprehension. "Perhaps," Kalen replied, his brow furrowed. "Or perhaps settlers. They travel farther north each year, seeking more land." The mention of settlers, and by extension the possibility of encountering individuals from her own kind, brought a complex mix of emotions to Amelia. Part of her yearned for familiar faces, for the comfort of a language she spoke fluently without effort, but another part, the part that had been forged in the crucible of her father's rejection and tempered by the wisdom of Anya and Kalen, felt a deep-seated wariness. She had learned that not all people from her world were kind, and she had no desire to return to the life that had cast her out. Chaitan, sensing the shift in mood, addressed the band. "We will approach cautiously. Kalen, you will scout ahead with a small group. Anya, you will remain with the main party and ensure the young ones are safe. Amelia, you will stay with Anya." Amelia felt a pang of disappointment, a desire to be part of the scouting party, to see what lay beyond the next ridge. But she understood Chaitan's decision. She was still considered an outsider, and her presence might complicate matters. As Kalen and a few other warriors rode off, their figures disappearing over a rise, Amelia felt a renewed sense of the precariousness of their situation. The beauty of the land was undeniable, but it was also a land of constant challenges, of hidden dangers, and of the ever-present need for vigilance. She looked at Anya, whose calm demeanor was a steadying presence, and found solace in the quiet strength that radiated from the older woman. The Old West was unforgiving, but Amelia was learning that resilience and unity were powerful weapons, and that even in the face of the unknown, there was strength to be found in companionship and shared purpose. The air grew noticeably colder as the Apache band neared their winter destination. The landscape had transformed from sparse, sun-baked hills into a more verdant, if still rugged, terrain. Pine trees, their needles a deep green, dotted the slopes, and the scent of damp earth and pine resin filled the air. Game was more plentiful here, and the hunters reported successful kills, ensuring their stores would be well stocked for the lean months ahead. Amelia, despite her initial apprehension about the scout party, found herself settling into the rhythm of their nomadic life. She had proven herself to be a diligent helper, her willingness to learn and her quiet perseverance earning her the respect of many in the band. Anya, of course, was her constant shadow, her wisdom a gentle guide, but Amelia was increasingly able to anticipate needs, to offer assistance without being asked, and to contribute meaningfully to the daily tasks. She had learned to make a surprisingly effective poultice from certain mountain herbs, a skill that impressed Anya. "You have a good touch, Amelia," the older woman had said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "The plants respond to your care." One evening, as they prepared for bed near a bubbling spring, Kalen returned with his scouting party. His face, usually bright and animated, was serious. "The smoke was from a trapper's cabin," he reported to Chaitan. "He is alone. He seemed wary, but not hostile. He has little food, and his furs are not good for the coming cold." Chaitan listened intently, his gaze fixed on Kalen. "Did he speak of other settlers?" "No," Kalen replied. "He said he had not seen another soul for many weeks. He is an old man, weary of the mountains." Chaitan nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "We will avoid him. Our priority is to reach the winter grounds safely. The Great Spirit provides for us, but we must also be wise." He then looked at Amelia, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "You understand, Amelia? We must not linger. The snows can come swiftly in these mountains." Amelia nodded, a sense of relief washing over her. The encounter with the trapper, though brief, had been a stark reminder of the isolation of this world, a world where individuals lived and died by their own hand, often far from any form of community or aid. It also reinforced her own situation. She too had been cast out, alone and vulnerable. The next few days saw them making good progress towards their final destination. The air was crisp, and the sunlight, though less intense than on the plains, was bright and clear. Amelia felt a sense of anticipation growing within her. She had been through so much since leaving her father's ranch, and the thought of reaching a place of relative safety and stability, even for the winter months, was a welcome prospect. One afternoon, as they crested a ridge, the breathtaking vista of a hidden valley unfolded before them. It was a place of stark beauty, with a winding river, clusters of sturdy evergreens, and a scattering of rocky outcrops that offered natural shelter. The air was still, and the silence was profound, broken only by the distant rush of the river. This was it, their winter home. A collective sigh of contentment seemed to ripple through the band. Chayton gave a rare, almost imperceptible smile. "We have arrived," he announced, his voice resonating with a quiet satisfaction. "The Great Spirit has guided us." Kaelin beamed, turning to Amelia. "It is a good place, is it not? Safe, and the hunting here is always plentiful." Amelia looked out at the valley, a sense of peace settling over her. She had survived. She had found refuge, not in the halls of her wealthy father, but in the heart of the wilderness, among a people who had shown her unexpected kindness and respect. As the band began to descend into the valley, Amelia felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the physical safety of this place, but for the inner strength and resilience she had discovered within herself. The Old West was a harsh mistress, but she was no longer the fragile girl who had been cast out. She was a survivor, and this winter she would find a new kind of belonging. The winter months in the hidden valley were a time of relative peace and profound learning for Amelia. The Apache band, under Chayton's leadership, established their camp with an organized efficiency, born of generations of experience. Small, sturdy dwellings, constructed from lodgepole pines and covered with animal hides, were erected, providing warmth and shelter against the biting mountain winds. Amelia, working alongside Anya and other women, found herself fully integrated into the daily life of the camp. She learned to prepare pelts, scraping them clean and softening them with a mixture of animal brains and smoke, a process that was both laborious and surprisingly satisfying. She helped grind dried berries and nuts into a coarse flour and assisted in the preparation of hearty stews that sustained them through the cold. The constant work kept her warm, kept her mind occupied, and most importantly, gave her a sense of purpose. Kaelin, despite his own duties as a hunter and scout, made time to continue Amelia's informal education. He taught her more about the medicinal properties of the mountain flora, showing her which roots could soothe a cough, which leaves could staunch bleeding, and which barks could be brewed into a strengthening tea. He also continued to share stories, tales that spoke of the interconnectedness of all life, of the wisdom of the elders, and of the deep respect his people held for the natural world. "The mountains have a spirit, Amelia," Kaelin explained one evening, as they watched snow fall softly through the air, blanketing the valley in a pristine white. "They have seen generations come and go. They hold the memories of our ancestors. When you are quiet, you can almost hear them whisper." Amelia found herself listening. She would sit by the fire, the warmth seeping into her bones, and listen to the wind sighing through the pines, to the creak of the lodges, to the murmur of voices around her. She realized that her father's world, so focused on material possessions and outward appearances, had been deaf to the subtler, more profound languages of life. Anya, observing Amelia's growing integration, offered quiet encouragement. She saw that Amelia was not merely adapting, but thriving. The resilience that had seen her through her illness and her banishment was now blossoming into a quiet strength, a self-possession that transcended her past hardships. One afternoon, a small hunting party returned with news of a lone wolf, its leg caught in a rusted bear trap, likely left by the trapper they had encountered weeks before. The animal was injured, its howls of pain echoing through the valley. Chayton, always practical, declared that the wolf was a danger to their livestock and would need to be dealt with. However, Amelia, hearing the desperate cries, felt a pang of empathy. She remembered her own vulnerability, her own suffering. She approached Anya, her voice earnest. "Can we not help it?" she asked. "It is in pain." Anya looked at Amelia, then at Chayton, who was observing the situation with a stoic detachment. "The wolf is a predator, Amelia," Chayton stated gruffly. "It is the way of things. But it is suffering, Amelia insisted, her voice trembling slightly. We have the knowledge to help it. Anya can make a salve. Kaelin can fashion a splint. She looked pleadingly at Anya. Please. Anya met Amelia's gaze, seeing the genuine compassion in her eyes. She saw not just a young woman seeking to alleviate suffering, but someone embodying the very principles of respect and interconnectedness that her people held dear. After a moment's consideration, Anya turned to Chaitan. The girl speaks with a true heart, Chaitan, Anya said, her voice calm and steady. The wolf, though a predator, is a creature of the Great Spirit. To offer aid in its suffering is a kindness that reflects well upon us all, and the knowledge we possess is meant to be shared, even with the wild creatures. Chaitan studied Amelia, then Anya, his stern expression softening almost imperceptibly. He saw the wisdom in Anya's words and the sincerity in Amelia's plea. Very well, he conceded with a nod, but it must be done quickly, and without risk to our own. Under Anya's direction, Amelia and Kaelin carefully approached the trapped wolf. It growled weakly, its eyes filled with pain and fear. With gentle hands, they managed to free its leg from the cruel trap. Amelia, using a clean piece of hide, carefully cleaned the wound while Anya applied her herbal salve. Kaelin fashioned a makeshift splint to support the injured limb. Throughout the process, Amelia spoke softly to the animal, her voice a soothing balm against its fear. As they released the wolf, watching it limp away into the snowy woods, Amelia felt a profound sense of satisfaction. She had not only survived her own ordeal, but had extended compassion to another creature in need. It was a testament to the lessons learned, a quiet affirmation of the strength that came not from dominance, but from empathy and understanding. The Old West, in its raw, untamed beauty, was teaching her the true meaning of resilience, a resilience that embraced not only self-preservation, but also a deep connection to all living things. The sun, a molten disk of a day's dying ember, bled across the vast expanse of the Arizona Territory. Dust, the ever-present companion of the frontier, swirled around the makeshift encampment where Clara lay, her breathing shallow, her skin burning with an unnatural heat. The fever had tightened its grip, transforming her once vibrant spirit into a fragile flicker. Beside her Kai sat, his weathered face a mask of quiet desperation. He had done all he could, the poultices of herbs, the cool cloths, the whispered prayers to the spirits he held dear, but the relentless tide of sickness seemed determined to pull her away from him. Across the dusty clearing, Jedediah watched, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. The storm that had raged within him for years, a tempest of pride, regret, and a gnawing shame, now threatened to consume him entirely. He had seen Clara, his daughter, his flesh and blood brought to the brink of death by his own callousness. The image of her, shivering and feverish, cast out into the unforgiving wilderness, was a brand seared into his soul. He had come seeking her, driven by a primal paternal instinct that had long been buried beneath layers of ambition and a misguided sense of honor. But what he found was a daughter he barely recognized, a stranger forged in hardship, clinging precariously to life. The Apache warriors who had brought Clara to this hidden valley, their faces stoic and unreadable, had also brought a grudging acceptance. They saw in Kai a man of quiet strength and deep compassion, a man who understood the delicate balance of life and the inherent value of every soul, no matter how seemingly insignificant. They had witnessed his unwavering devotion to the sick child, his gentle hands tending to her every need. They had also seen Jedediah, a man consumed by his own internal turmoil, his once imposing presence now a shadow of its former self, his eyes haunted by a guilt he could no longer outrun. As the stars began to prick the darkening sky, a hush fell over the camp. The wind, a mournful whisper, rustled through the sparse desert brush, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of a cooler night. Kai, his voice raspy, leaned closer to Clara. "Hold on, little bird," he murmured, his hand stroking her fevered brow. "You are strong, stronger than you know." Jedediah, his boots crunching on the dry earth, approached Kai, his steps heavy with a burden of years. He stopped a respectful distance away, his gaze fixed on his daughter. The silence between them stretched, taut with unspoken words, with a lifetime of estrangement. Finally, Jedediah cleared his throat, the sound a harsh rasp in the quiet night. She looks like her mother, he managed, his voice thick with emotion. It was a small offering, a hesitant bridge across the chasm that separated them. Kai met Jedediah's gaze, his eyes holding a mixture of weariness and a nascent flicker of understanding. He saw not the proud rancher who had cast his daughter away, but a broken man, finally facing the consequences of his actions. She has her mother's spirit too, Kai replied, his voice gentle. A spirit that can weather any storm. Jedediah nodded, his gaze returning to Clara. I was a fool, he confessed, the words tumbling out, raw and unvarnished. A proud, blind fool. I let my pride blind me to the truth, to my own flesh and blood. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. I never wanted this for her. Not this suffering, not this abandonment. A lone coyote howled in the distance, its mournful cry echoing the ache in Jedediah's heart. Kai remained silent, allowing the old rancher to unburden himself. There was no easy absolution, no quick fix for years of pain, but in the shared gaze of two men bound by their love for a sick child, a fragile seed of reconciliation had been planted. Jedediah took a hesitant step closer, his eyes pleading. If she recovers, I want to make amends. I want to be a father to her. I will give her everything she deserves, everything I denied her. His voice cracked. I will dedicate the rest of my days to ensuring she knows love, security, and that she never feels abandoned again. Kai looked at Jedediah, truly looked at him, and saw a flicker of hope in the depths of his despair. The path ahead would be long and arduous, filled with the ghosts of past hurts. But for Clara's sake, for the possibility of healing, he was willing to consider it. She is strong, Kai repeated, his gaze unwavering, and she deserves a chance. If she heals, and if she wishes it, then perhaps there is a place for you in her life again. But the choice always will be hers. Jedediah's shoulders sagged with a profound relief, tinged with the daunting weight of the task ahead. He looked at the small, feverish form of his daughter, a wave of fierce determination washing over him. He had lost her once through his own folly. He would not lose her again. He would earn her trust, her forgiveness, and her love one day, one kind gesture at a time. The Apache elders, observing from a distance, exchanged knowing glances. The winds of change, they understood, were beginning to blow across the desolate plains. The healing of a broken family, like the healing of a wounded child, was a journey that began with a single, courageous step. The night deepened, wrapping the small encampment in its star-dusted embrace, a silent witness to the fragile dawn of a new beginning. The dawn arrived not with a triumphant fanfare, but with a gentle, hesitant light, filtering through the canvas of Clara's makeshift shelter. The oppressive heat of the fever seemed to have loosened its vice-like grip, replaced by a lingering weakness that clung to her like the desert dust. Her breathing was more even, her eyelids fluttered, and a faint color began to return to her pallid cheeks. Kai, who had barely slept, his eyes etched with exhaustion, watched her with a vigilant intensity, a silent prayer of gratitude forming on his lips. The Apache healer, a woman whose wisdom was as profound as the ancient mountains surrounding them, nodded approvingly. "The fever breaks," she declared, her voice a low, resonant hum. "But the journey back is as important as the fight to stay." Jedediah, having spent the night near the perimeter of the camp, a silent guardian, felt a tremor of hope course through him. He had observed Kai's tireless care, his quiet strength, and the profound respect he commanded from the Apache. He had also witnessed the subtle shifts in Clara's condition, the almost imperceptible signs of returning life. The words he had spoken to Kai the previous night still echoed in his mind, a promise that felt both daunting and desperately necessary. He knew that words were cheap. Actions, however, were the currency of true change. As Clara's awareness slowly returned, fragmented images began to coalesce. The rough, comforting feel of Kai's hand, the gentle murmur of his voice, the worried lines on his face. These were the first things she truly registered. Then the unfamiliar faces of the Apache, their eyes filled with a quiet concern, flickered at the edges of her vision. And finally, she saw him. A man standing a little apart, his shoulders stooped, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that was both unsettling and strangely familiar. Jedediah. A flicker of confusion, then a wave of apprehension washed over Clara. The memories of her father's stern disapproval, his ultimate rejection, were still sharp, still capable of inflicting pain. She turned her head away, seeking the solace of Kai's familiar presence. Kai, sensing her unease, gently squeezed her hand. "He is here, Clara," he said softly, his gaze flicking towards Jedediah. "He came for you." Jedediah, seeing Clara's reaction, felt a fresh wave of guilt wash over him. He understood her fear, her hesitation. He had earned it. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his hands held open, palms up, in a gesture of peace. "Clara," he began, his voice rough with disuse and emotion. I am sorry." Clara's eyes, still weak, met his for a fleeting moment. There was no immediate warmth, no easy forgiveness. The wounds ran too deep for that, but there was a spark of recognition, a hint of the bond that had once existed between them, however fractured. "I was wrong," Jedediah continued, his voice gaining a measure of strength. "So terribly wrong. My pride, my anger, they blinded me to the precious gift I had. You are my daughter, Clara, and I have failed you. I have failed myself." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the stark beauty of the valley, a place so different from the opulent ranch he called home. "These people," he gestured towards Kai and the Apache, "they have shown you kindness when I showed you none. They have cared for you when I cast you out." The Apache healer approached, her presence calm and reassuring. "The body heals, but the spirit carries its scars," she said, her words addressed to Clara, but her gaze met Jedediah's. "Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. It must be earned, not demanded." Jedediah nodded, understanding the unspoken challenge. He knew that his words, however heartfelt, were only the beginning. He needed to prove his sincerity, to demonstrate a change that ran deeper than mere apology. He looked at Kai, the man who had become Clara's protector, her caregiver, her friend. "Kai," Jedediah said, his voice steady, "You have been more of a father to my daughter in these past weeks than I have been in years. I owe you a debt I can never truly repay. If Clara recovers, and if she wishes it, I want to ensure she has a stable home, a future. I will provide for her, as a father should. But I understand that her heart, her trust must be won. I will honor whatever decision she makes." Kai inclined his head, acknowledging Jedediah's sincerity. He saw the genuine remorse in the old rancher's eyes, the raw vulnerability beneath the veneer of his former authority. He also saw the love for Clara, a love that had clearly been rekindled by the near loss. "Clara is strong," Kai reiterated, his gaze meeting hers, "and she will decide what is best for her. Your presence here, your concern, it is a start, but healing takes time, for the body and for the heart." Over the next few days, a quiet routine settled upon the camp. Clara, though still weak, began to regain her strength. She would spend hours observing Kai as he tended to the horses, or listening to the hushed stories of the Apache elders. Jedediah, respecting the boundaries, would sit at a distance, his presence a silent testament to his newfound humility. He would bring her small gifts, a smooth, colorful stone he had found, a wildflower carefully preserved. He would offer quiet observations about the changing light, the flight of a hawk, anything to break the silence without intruding. One afternoon, as Clara sat propped against a large rock, watching the distant mountains, Jedediah approached, a small, intricately carved wooden bird in his hand. He knelt a few feet away, his gaze never leaving her face. I carved this," he stammered, offering it to her. "It reminded me of the songs you used to sing when you were small." Clara hesitated, then slowly reached out and took the bird. Her fingers traced its delicate wings, its smooth, polished surface. It was a simple gift, yet it held a weight of unspoken history, of a father's regret and a longing for connection. She looked at Jedediah, truly looked at him, and for the first time a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a flicker of acknowledgement, a silent acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, the chasm between them might not be as insurmountable as she had once believed. The Apache watched, their faces impassive, understanding that the greatest battles were often fought not with weapons, but within the quiet chambers of the human heart. The desert wind, ever present, seemed to carry the whispered promise of a fragile peace. The days that followed were a tapestry, woven with threads of recovery, reconciliation, and the dawning realization of a future yet unwritten. Clara, her strength steadily returning, moved from fragile convalescence to a quiet curiosity about the world around her. The fever was a distant memory, replaced by the subtle aches of a body reclaiming its vitality. She spent hours with Kai, learning the rhythm of the ranch, the care of the animals, the vastness of the land that had become her temporary home. His quiet patience, his unwavering kindness, had become a source of comfort and stability she had never known. Jedediah, too, had found a new rhythm. He shed the arrogance of his past, the rigid pride that had defined him for so long. He spent his days helping Kai with the ranch work, his strong hands, once accustomed to the reins of power, now calloused from mending fences and tending to livestock. He spoke little of his former life, his focus solely on the present, on contributing, on proving himself worthy. He would often sit with Clara in the evenings, not intruding but simply present, sharing the silence, the scent of mesquite smoke, the vast star-strewn sky. He learned to read the subtle cues in her expressions, the flicker of a smile, the shadow of a past hurt. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Clara sat with Kai by the gently flowing creek. Jedediah was some distance away, sharpening a knife with methodical strokes. "Kai," Clara began, her voice soft, thoughtful, "you have been everything to me. A protector, a healer, a friend." She turned to him, her eyes holding a depth of gratitude that words could barely convey. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." Kai met her gaze, his own eyes warm. "It was fate, Clara, and your own strength. You fought for your life." He offered a gentle smile. "This place, this life, it suits you. You have a natural way with the land, with the animals." Jedediah, overhearing their conversation, paused his task, his gaze drawn to his daughter. He felt a pang of possessiveness, quickly followed by a wave of acceptance. Kai was right. Clara had found her own strength here, in this rugged, unpretentious land. Clara then turned her attention to Jedediah, her expression open, devoid of the fear that had once clouded it. "Father," she said, the word feeling both strange and familiar on her tongue. Jedediah's hand stilled. He looked up, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment of truth. "I have been thinking," Clara continued, her voice steady. "This ranch, it is my home now. I have learned so much here. I have learned to be strong, to be resilient, and I have learned to trust again, thanks to Kai." She looked from Kai to Jedediah, her gaze encompassing them both. "I don't want to go back to the life I left behind. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Jedediah's breath caught in his throat. He had prepared himself for this, for her rejection of him, of his world. But to hear her embrace this life, this wilderness, with such conviction, it was a bittersweet revelation. "I understand," Jedediah said, his voice husky. He stood and walked towards them, his steps no longer heavy with guilt, but with a quiet purpose. He stopped before Clara, his gaze earnest. "I came to take you back to the ranch, Clara, to give you the life I thought you deserved. But you are right. Your strength, your spirit, they are not meant for the gilded cage I offered. They are meant for the open sky, for the challenge of the land." He placed a hand on Kai's shoulder. "Kai, you have given my daughter a gift far greater than any material wealth. You have given her freedom, self-reliance, and a sense of belonging. I respect that. I will not interfere." He turned back to Clara. "However, if you ever need me, if you ever desire a connection to your past or a father's support, I will be there. I will help you build whatever future you envision for yourself here. My wealth, my resources, they are yours to command, not to own you." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. It was not the reconciliation she might have once dreamed of, a dramatic embrace and a return to a life of comfort. It was something far more profound. Acceptance. Acceptance of her choices, acceptance of her newfound self, and acceptance of the imperfect yet genuine love that was being offered. "Thank you, Father," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Kai." The Apache elders, who had observed this exchange from a respectful distance, nodded among themselves. The spirits of the land, they knew, favored those who honored the truth of their hearts. In the weeks that followed, Jedediah remained. He did not intrude, but he was a constant, supportive presence. He helped Kai and Clara establish a more permanent home, a sturdy ranch house that blended with the landscape, a place that spoke of hard work and quiet resilience. He brought with him skilled craftsmen and supplies, not as a domineering patriarch but as a partner, offering his resources to build the life Clara had chosen. Clara, under Kai's guidance and with Jedediah's quiet support, began to envision her future. She spoke of expanding the ranch, of raising cattle, of creating a legacy that was her own. Kai, his heart full, readily agreed to be her partner, not just in work, but in life. Their bond, forged in hardship and tested by adversity, had deepened into a love as strong and enduring as the mountains themselves. Jedediah, his purpose fulfilled, knew his time in the valley was drawing to a close. He had come seeking to reclaim his daughter, but he had found something more valuable: redemption. He had learned that true wealth lay not in possessions, but in the strength of character, the courage to admit fault, and the unwavering love of family, however unconventional that family might become. As Jedediah prepared to depart, a sense of peace settled over the valley. He embraced Clara, a silent promise of continued support passing between them. He clasped Kai's hand, a gesture of mutual respect and gratitude. "You have given me back a daughter, Kai," Jedediah said, his voice clear and strong, "and you have shown me the true meaning of a father's love." Clara watched him go, a pang of sadness mixed with a profound sense of gratitude. Her journey had been one of pain and loss, but it had led her to a place of profound self-discovery and enduring love. She turned to Kai, their eyes meeting, a silent understanding passing between them. The sun, a magnificent golden orb, climbed higher in the sky, illuminating a horizon filled with endless possibilities. The story of the wealthy rancher's daughter, cast out and nearly lost, was not an ending, but a beginning, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the redemptive power of love, and the quiet strength found in embracing one's true path under the vast, boundless sky of the American West. The Apache, observing from their ancestral lands, knew that new legends were being forged, not in the clash of swords but in the quiet triumph of the heart.